Hello curious people, today I am here to help you. I know you are using this video to help you fall asleep. So before you like this video and subscribe to the channel, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Make yourself comfortable now, I stepped into the stories. Understood. Jeanette Kahn, creator and editor of Monday Macabre, turns and stalks down the hallway of our claustrophobic office. I'm left alone with my computer screen, my keyboard, and a cursor flashing patiently after the sentence I managed to write. Halloween, more than any other time of year, holds the promise of the unknown. Not bad, but not great. It doesn't make you sit up and pay attention. It doesn't have the creepy factor. Not unless I use it as the start of a Lovecraftian tale. Nah, one of my fellow writers is taking a shot at that. He's calling his story The Innsmouth Look. I mentally pictured Jeanette with a deep one's face. Asterisk get to work asterisk. Right. After deleting the sentence, I stare at the cursor. Sometimes words flow like blood through my veins. Other times, like now, I have a clot. Maybe YouTube will help. I search for If I Were a Rich Man, from Fiddler on the Roof, and its corollary Rich Girl by Gwen Stefani. Both focus on the dream of becoming wealthy. While Tavi would rather spend money on his family and his God, Gwen would rather clean out Vivienne Westwood in her Galliano gown. I wouldn't do either. Instead, I'd buy Jeanette out and take charge of this horror rag. I'd make it famous. Right now, it's a respectable mid-lister, found online and at the brick-and-mortar bookstores that still exist in larger cities. Large cities. Maybe that's where I should start. Chicago on Halloween was full of more tricks than treats. That's clearer and more concise. But I don't know what tricks the Windy City holds on October 31st. Razor blades and apples. Poisoned candy. That's been done before. Maybe a severed head in some unfortunate kid's pumpkin-shaped treat bucket. It might hit too close to home for some folks. Maybe I'll ask the reader what Halloween means to them in a roundabout way. What does Halloween hide? Perfect. What lies beneath the surface of the masks and the color of the costumes? Perhaps the innocent smile of a child. Then again, gah, evil kids creep me out, and that subgenre's overdone. I let the cursor gobble up those last two sentences like peace offerings. I'm hoping they'll be accepted. My stomach growls. Lunchtime. I mumble to no one in particular, then leave the computer having finished two lousy sentences. Writer's block is a bitch. Time for a break. This, of course, means having to sneak past the deep one on my way out. Tenet. My heart leaps into my throat. Yes, Jeanette. You have 12 hours to send me your masterpiece. Otherwise, you're the only writer on our staff who cares what an Oxford comma is. I'm thinking that copy editing is where your talents truly lie. No. The word falls out of my mouth before I can take it back. I mean, you have a deal. Jeanette smirks and returns to her laptop. I flee the building for some fresh air. Late October greets me, crisp and cool. My birthday is this week on the 22nd. What do I want? A night out, dinner and a movie at the theater. What's playing? I ask my phone. Several horror films and a rom-com pop up in my local listings. I want to see Heretic, but according to Google, that comes out on November 15th. By then, I'll either be a superstar or a slave at Monday Macabre, aiming to wrest from Halloween and all that it entails. Online movie streaming services. Entails and trails. My stomach's grumbling again. I opt for the Chinese place across the street. Then something else catches my eye. A new store has opened up nearby, one with a hanging wooden sign. Cinderella's Curios. Below this elegant text is a cutout of a silver sliver. I'm immediately curious. What would Cinderella collect? A silver bell chimes as I open the heavy glass door. It slides shut on its own. Whoa! Collectibles of all sorts greet me. Porcelain, crystal, coins, various ceramics. An actual glass slipper, courtesy of Swarovski, is the first thing I focus on. The price tag. $259. I'm immediately reminded of a little rhyme. A wonder to look at, delightful to hold. But if you break it, consider it sold. A store like this would ordinarily be a nightmare. I'm a klutz, but I'm so transfixed I can barely move. Come on in, says a soft and tinkling voice. I won't charge you for an accident. Asterisk, we'll see about that asterisk. Remarkable place you've got here, isn't it? A smiling older woman with round wire-rimmed glasses heads toward me, not bumping into a thing. Not even brushing her precious possessions. Right out of a fairy tale. It's been a dream come true to open this shop. I grin. So, you're Cinderella. The woman's laugh is as delightful as the ringing of the silver bell. I'm afraid I'm too old for that role. Call me the fairy godmother. Something gnaws at the back of my mind, but I shove it aside and chuckle back. Are you after something special? Not really. How about a treasure for your birthday? Even if yours is already passed, every day is a birthday of sorts. A chance to try once more, to reinvent oneself anew. Good point. Splendid. I have an item in mind that I think you'll like. One thing. Asterisk, please don't let it be too expensive. Asterisk, don't let it be too fragile. Don't worry. The woman turns to go. Feel free to sit down if you need to. I find a chair nearly concealed by shelves of porcelain dolls. I take her up on her offer. After a while, I start to think she's forgotten about me, and I should head for the Chinese restaurant after all. I'm due back at the office in a half hour, and I need to eat. I'm getting lightheaded. Here we are. She comes back carrying the most beautiful watch I've ever seen. The face is transparent, so I can see all the minute gears churning inside. The vinyl band is clear too. One thing is peculiar though. It only has an hour hand. Lovely, isn't it? I'll even give you a discount. $100. Too rich for my blood, and I don't know. It's not what I'm looking for. What are you looking for? What do you want more than anything right now? Asterisk lunch. Asterisk talent. Again, the word escapes me before I can stop it coming out of my mouth. I write for a horror magazine, and the Halloween issue's coming up. My boss is expecting a miracle in 12 hours. I don't have it in me. Don't you? The woman's eyes twinkle. You'd be surprised what you can get done in that amount of time if you're willing to apply yourself. I'm not talking about work ethic. I'm talking pure, unadulterated talent. The kind that leaves you speechless after reading certain passages, that makes you go wow, and makes you wish you could write like that. Go talent. Isn't that a tad too ambitious for what you're trying to accomplish? I don't care. No one ever said Shakespeare is the only goat. Edgar Allan Poe is one too, in my humble opinion. So is Stephen King. I'd give anything to write something that sends shivers down our readers' spines, and more importantly, makes them gape in wonder once it's done. You believe in that, don't you? Indeed I do. I reach my hand out to take the watch, but she gently withdraws it. Now then, we know what you want. What are you willing to trade for it? I don't have much dough. Besides, talent isn't something money can buy. I'll tell you what. Ordinarily, I have scads of time, but now I'm on a deadline. If I could trade time for talent in a 12-hour stretch, I'd certainly do so. But that isn't possible, is it? I sigh. No, not even for you. I wouldn't say that. She stretches out her hand. I offer you this watch for the low price of $50. Consider it a birthday present. Are you serious? As serious as my merchandise. I don't deal in fakes or trash. Obviously not. I stroke the watch's face. If you really mean it's $50, I'll take it. Do you take credit cards? The woman shakes her head. Darn, that's all the cash I have. I think of getting up and leaving, but my eyes are glued to the gorgeous gift. Ah, what the hey. I take the money out of my purse and hand it over. Pleasure doing business with you. Wait. 3 things. She traces her finger over a button on the clear vinyl band. First, when you wish to activate it, push this while you have the watch on your wrist. Second, don't push it before you're ready. Third, and most importantly, she leans in. Whatever you start, you must finish. Goosebumps break out on my arms. This trade is final, as are all sales from my establishment. I understand. Do you? I'd hate for you to be disappointed with your purchase. Trust me, it's magnificent. There's no other word for it. I'm glad. The shop owner beams. Also remember to keep your wrist clean before activating the watch. A dab of rubbing alcohol will do. Is that so my skin oils won't damage the metal? No, it's for something far more important. Another critical exchange. Before I can ask what it is, the silver bell rings again. Oh, I do apologize, but duty calls. Farewell, dear. Make wise use of your time. She turns away and walks toward the front door. I slip my new watch into my purse and follow her. She greets the next customer. I venture outside and across the street at last. At the Golden Dragon, I receive a fortune cookie with my meal. Great wealth lies within you. Maybe it refers to inner qualities like honesty and caring, but maybe it also refers to what I seek. I entertain this latter possibility with a secret smile. Once I finish lunch and leave the restaurant, I debate whether or not to go back to the office. I can write my story in a much less nerve-wracking environment than my cubicle. On the other hand, I don't want Jeanette to think I'm taking the rest of the day off. Her deadline looms, and it won't brook interruptions. I text her that I'll be working from home. My laptop awaits me there, along with its patiently blinking cursor. I take my new watch out of my purse. What had the owner of Cinderella's Curios said? To clean my wrist with rubbing alcohol before I put it on, and push the button on the band. Strange directions, but I obey. She also said to push it once I wanted to start, but not before I was ready. I'm ready now. I stretch, take a drink of my Mountain Dew Code Red, and try the button. A sharp pain makes me cry out and swear. A needle on the underside of the watch face has plunged itself into my wrist and is drawing blood into it, drenching the gears. The hour hand, which hasn't heretofore moved, floats above the droplets and inches forward ever so slightly. Terror ripples through me. I now understand what the lady was really trying to tell me about the watch. Time traded for talent. Blood traded for time. I unfasten the band, but the needle's stuck fast in my wrist, and I don't want to try removing it. I refasten it. The watch will stay on until my work is complete. What have I done? Its clock is ticking. What happens if I don't finish before it strikes 12? I lay my fingers on my keyboard and start typing furiously, not wanting to find out. Asterisk, 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 AHOUR, 1 asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. What does Halloween hide? What lurks behind the surface of the masks and the color of the costumes? More than any other holiday, it holds the promise of the unknown. Sophie Taffis loved to collect. From her very first assortment of love-worn stuffed animals to her doll lineup to her carefully studied rocks and minerals from the periodic table, her collections were worth far more than money. They represented years of searching and finding, winnowing and selecting, preparing and displaying. They were her heart and soul. Yet, as always, something was missing. On Halloween of her junior year in high school, Sophie and her friends decided to go to the crossroads on the outskirts of town. It had been a teen hangout since time immemorial. Not even the cops could run them off completely. The best they could do was cruise by every once in a while, which wasn't enough to stop the sneakiest and most determined partiers. Besides, Sophie's social circle came from good families. Good meaning rich. Even if they got caught, they were sure they'd be let off with a warning. Speaking of which, rumors warned that here was where people went to make a certain kind of deal. Not in dollars and cents, but in much more expensive commodities. Was Sophie a believer? In a nominal sense, but she wouldn't let her peers know what or how much she held to. October 31st fell wintry cold, with a sky full of stars and teenage hearts full of yearning. They all had something they wanted, but what were they willing to give in return? Brett and Ashley were atheists, here for the extra-legal fun and not the paranormal aspects of Halloween. Miranda, however, was a different story. If you were to ask her if she was still scared of the boogeyman, she'd tell you no, but she wouldn't reveal that she kept a close eye on her closet every night. When they reached the crossroads, Sophie and company passed around a flask of vodka and talked about what they'd heard. Brett said that his cousin's friend came here, made a pact with the devil for blues guitar mastery, and then killed himself when his upgraded skills weren't up to the task. Scoffing, Ashley countered that the scariest thing that had happened so far was a hit and run. No more, no less. Miranda asked if the ghosts of the victims haunted the premises. Ashley and Brett snickered, but Sophie stayed quiet, unsure. She thought she felt a weight in the air, a curious presence that gave her more goosebumps than the temperature. Ashley and Brett made out. Miranda and Sophie stared at the sky silently, wondering why they were out here if nothing weird was going to happen. Finally, Miranda asked, "Soph, do you think there's a heaven?" "Yeah." "What about hell?" "Also, yeah." Sophie figured these admissions were safe. Lots of people believe the same. "What do you think hell is like?" Sophie paused. "I think it's different for each person. Not some generic lake of fire where everyone goes. If we deserve punishment, it'll be tailor-made for us." After a few minutes, Miranda spoke again. "What would your punishment be?" "I don't know. I'd like to think I haven't been all that bad. I don't cheat, steal, or kill, although I lie from time to time. Maybe my version of hell would be having to tell the truth all the time, no matter how harmful or ugly to everyone. Yikes. My version would be having to get on a scale minute after minute, hour after hour, so everyone could see how much I weighed, then laugh at me." Sophie's heart sank. She knew how much Miranda struggled with food issues. Seriously, though, what if our worst fears come true in hell? There'd be no one around to save us but ourselves, and we couldn't, no matter how hard we tried. "Hey, that sounds like school," said Brett. The four friends snorted with laughter. "Don't worry about it. Hell's not real." Sophie remained uncertain. "Brett, I'm freezing. Do you actually want to stay out here until midnight?" "Nah, man. I just came so I could neck with you." Ashley gave him a playful punch on the arm. "Hey, if you're not going to be cool about this, get in your car and leave." "Cool about what, Soph? It's been a lousy Halloween. Come on, Ash. Let's go." Ashley and Brett headed for Brett's beat-up Ford. Miranda stayed put. "If there are any ghosts or spirits, any strange manifestations, I'm going to be the first one to see them." She grinned playfully at her best friend. "Sorry, girl. Sorry, yourself. I'm looking for something in particular, or rather someone. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I reread everything I've written, after second-guessing myself 1,000 times and making countless little edits. I consider my draft above average, but it's nowhere near what I'm aiming for. It has potential, just not geoid potential. Asterisk, be patient. You've introduced the main character and set the stage. Your new skills will manifest themselves in time asterisk. Asterisk, main character. Don't you mean the main character's asterisk?" Silence in my mind. I'm talking to myself again. Asterisk. "And how much time?" "I've been at this for 2 hours, considering the relatively little amount of text I typed, and I only have 10 hours left." Asterisk. Asterisk, patience. I said asterisk. Is that Jeanette I hear inside my head, or the voice of my fairy godmother? Asterisk, keep at it. You haven't a moment to lose, my dear tenant. Asterisk. Definitely, Jeanette. The deep one has a hold on me even at home. With my blood coursing through my new watch, I keep writing. Asterisk, 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 AHOUR3 asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Miranda couldn't quite believe it. Here she was, the most credulous person in their little group, wondering if Sophie had lost her mind. Not even she, Miranda, could brave the glacial air for the sake of nothing. Sophie wore a stylish parka, but Miranda only had a tank top and shorts on. She wrapped her arms around herself and rubbed as fast as she could, hoping the friction would warm her. "Are you cold?" asked Sophie. "Duh. Want to borrow my coat?" "That's okay. Hey, Soph, would you mind if I left?" "Why?" Miranda gestured all around her. "There's no one else here but us. It's not midnight yet. Would you like to come over to my house and crash? We can eat lots of candy." "Nah. Besides, I don't want to waste this opportunity." "For what?" "To make a deal." Sophie smiled. "Here, I thought you were the superstitious one. Hey, no fair. Stay with me. I'm going to need some company if this all goes wrong. Who you think will show up? Someone who gives you exactly what you want. Exactly when you want it. The devil. Yeah, but more powerful and not evil. Someone beyond space and time." "What? You're crazy." "Maybe, but tonight I can afford to be a little nuts. So can you." I'm going home. Suit yourself." Sophie put her hood up and turned away from her friend, toward the crossroads, an icy wind coursing around them, and through their flimsy defenses. Sophie was better prepared, however. She didn't regret seeing the bright red taillights of Miranda's Chevy vanish into the distance. This night and this chance were for her and her alone. She stood in the middle of the intersection and waited. "Greetings." Sophie whirled around. Someone else was indeed there, an impossibly tall man in a fedora and trench coat. She couldn't see his face, but his slitted eyes glowed bluish-white, as if they were lit by an inner star. "Who are you?" Sophie cried. "Where did you come from all of a sudden?" "Some call me the stranger, others the collector. I prefer the curator." "What's that?" "The manager of a museum and its exhibits. The word comes from the Latin cura, meaning to care. I care deeply for everything in my care, my young friend. As for where I come from, you answered the question, beyond space and time." "You're kidding." Sophie blinked. "You're the one I want to see." "Of course. Then let's make a deal." Unbeknownst to Sophie, the curator's formless mouth curved into a smirk. "I don't think you comprehend what's involved. So, tell me. First, I don't trade in souls, but in spirits. The difference is that your soul is the universal part of you that loves its creator, God, if you will, and seeks to unite with him, // it. Your spirit is unique, the you that you identify with, yourself. I care for all of the individual selves that have dealt with me. What do you wish to bargain for? Money, love, the well-being of your friends and loved ones. All those things are great, but I can't explain what I'm really after. Do try. I'm a collector just like you. I love all the things I've bought and found over the years, but I can never have enough. Every time I look at one of my collections, I'm proud, but I also wonder what else I can acquire. I don't want to be greedy, but how come I always want more? It's an obsession. In short," said the curator, "you want to be me." Sophie pointed her index finger in the air. "Yeah. Again, I don't think you comprehend what that involves. Again, tell me. I didn't finish the first time." "Oh, geez. Sorry. The second thing you should know is that I give each of the ones I curate a task to perform, not in the afterlife, but in the here and now. This special service is a binding contract and must be fulfilled on time. Otherwise, the deal's off. And I also extract a penalty. It could be monetary, it could be personal. I don't do this out of malice, but to teach that in all things there must be balance and justice. Fear not. I won't ask you to do something against your conscience. Then what do you want from me?" "I'd like to meet your friend Miranda. She's afraid of what she cannot see, and even what she can, her own body. I want to show her she has nothing to fear. I can show her vistas and experiences far beyond this world, each with a lesson to put into practice on good old planet Earth. 1 month from now, I want you to bring her here to this crossroads. Introduce me, and your debt shall be paid. And what do I get out of it? I'll show you how to curate spirits, to influence others much more than you do now. Your social circle is wealthy, but it's not wide. You'll learn people's strengths, weaknesses, true motivations, and all the secrets they hide. Sophie gaped. I'm not sure I want that. It's hard to admit, but you do. You want to collect friends. After a moment, she sighed sadly. Yeah, you're right. Is that so bad? Not as long as you care for them, and they care for you. Do we have a deal? Wait, what's the third thing? I almost forgot. While I'm here in your world, my physical form is fragile. I require 3 drops of your blood to help retain it. Would you lend them to me? I hate bleeding. It will only take a prick of your palm. Okay, if you say so. Sophie turned her hand palm upward and allowed the stranger to dig one of his long nails into her flesh. It hurt for a fraction of a second. Then he grasped her hand in his own, which was even more frigid. Sophie felt herself weaken. She wobbled in place, then caught her balance. He pressed her palm to his wrist to nourish a transparent watch whose gears ran on blood. Unbeknownst to Sophie, the curator lived on borrowed time. Voila! Our bargain is made. On November 30th, I expect to see Miranda. He left the crossroads. With her cold, cauterized hand, Sophie waved goodbye. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I can't believe it. I'm wearing the curator's watch and am bound to him by the blood I'm shedding. Time traded for talent. Blood traded for time. This story I'm writing isn't fiction. I'm feeling drained. I need a nap. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I've slept 3 hours. 3. I forgot to take my watch off, but I still lost track of time. And, asterisk tenet. How's everything coming along, asterisk? Shut up, Jeanette. I have a far worse taskmaster than you breathing down my neck. Yet he's remained silent. You won't shut the hell up. Get out of my head. Asterisk, I will when you're finished. Get back to work, asterisk. Asterisk, don't be afraid. Asterisk, my fairy godmother chimes in. Asterisk, you've got time, asterisk. I sure hope so. Asterisk, 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 AAOUR6, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Throughout November, Sophie tried to prepare Miranda for what would be coming next. The 2 girls discussed far more than they ever had on the subject of the supernatural. Sophie talked further about heaven and hell, and Miranda disclosed her fear of everything from the number 666 to the boogeyman. Neither of them laughed at what the other had to say. They both sensed this subject matter was no laughing matter. As for Ashley and Brett, they were too busy with each other to care about Sophie and Miranda's existential dilemmas. The afterlife was all well and good, but in this life, the couple had some serious necking to do. As the curator had promised, Sophie began to widen her social milieu. People who had ignored her now asked to sit with her at lunch, collaborate on homework, and party after hours. They asked her advice at every turn, from which of the latest fashion trends were worth following to which colleges to visit. Even though she didn't have all the answers, Sophie acted like she did. Therein lay the secret. She dared not admit her other secrets. She could read minds, surface thoughts only, but they were enough. She could also discern when anyone lied to her. They did, a lot. Fake it till you make it was the unofficial motto of high school, and she suspected of life. Most alarmingly, she learned hidden truths about people whenever she touched them. Even brushing up against them in the hallway, she could tell which girls had anorexia or bulimia, which athletes were using steroids, and which teachers were at the end of their rope due to students' misbehavior. This constant onslaught of knowledge was dizzying. She learned to tune most of it out like she tuned out boring lectures. Still, this thrilled her as much as basking in others' attention. Her new friends gave her a sense of importance that her old ones never had, except Miranda. Even though she now played second fiddle to Sophie's new cater, she remained loyal and told the truth when it needed telling. Hence Sophie's misgivings about the end of the month. What did the curator want with Miranda? To steal her spirit? To take her away? No, that would be evil, and Sophie swore she hadn't called upon an evil being. He had mentioned experiences and vistas far beyond this world. What kind? What lessons would her best friend learn to help her on good old planet Earth? The more Sophie thought about it, the more disturbed she became. For the first time in her life, she ignored her priceless collections, even her new friends, and focused entirely on the problem of her old one. What could Miranda offer the curator that Sophie couldn't give him? Belief and blind trust, but that was all. Sophie could help him with what she'd learned. Wasn't that what knowledge was for? Why not put it to practical use? What Sophie now knew eclipsed what Miranda knew by an order of magnitude. Ridiculous it was. Ridiculous that the mysterious stranger Sophie had contacted favored Miranda instead. Well, Sophie would show him. She'd prove her worth. When November 30th came, Sophie went to the rendezvous alone. She waited and waited. By the light of the full moon, she could see the crossroads stretching into the distance, discarded trash blowing across its fairway. She did not see the curator. At long last, a thick strip of paper with 3 words in blood blew across her path. I war any to you. Hot fear filled Sophie's heart. What kind of penalty would the curator impose? As he had specified, the deal was off. As he had also suggested, the penalty was both monetary and personal. Her retinue ignored her like yesterday's news once they realized how shallow Sophie was. Once she'd gone home after meeting no one at the crossroads, she'd smashed most of her collectibles. What had once cost her a fortune lay on her bedroom floor in hundreds of pieces. All she could do was clean up the mess and cry. Damn you, Miranda. Sophie wept. I hope I never see your big fat face again. At 3 a.m., she got the call. Her best friend since forever had committed suicide. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Oh dear. That escalated quickly. Asterisk, it did not. It progressed in its time, and we both barely paid attention. Asterisk. We? Who is we? And who are you? Jeanette? You don't sound like her. Asterisk, I don't know who Jeanette is, but it's time you learned who I am, the owner of Cinderella's Curios, and the subject of your tale. Asterisk. A horrible realization dawns on me. You're Sophie, I say aloud. Sophie Tophis. Yes, rearrange the letters of my last name, and you'll understand me. Tophis. Faust. The man who sold his soul to the devil for knowledge. Sophie had done the same. Asterisk. The curator is not Satan, but he demands prompt payment for his boons. Asterisk. Payment. You didn't bring Miranda to the crossroads because you were jealous. The curator wanted to help her, but you didn't. You wanted her to stay the same, in second place behind your new acquaintances. You bitch. Asterisk, hear me out. I spent the rest of my life trying to atone for what I did to her. I dedicated myself to granting others' wishes. In terms of my collections, I built one to share instead of hoard. Ergo, my little shop. Everything I have is for sale to others, or to be given away. That watch was my gift to you. Asterisk. You mean the curator's watch? The one that's drawing my blood right now. That's a gift. More like a curse. I can't even risk taking it off. I'm in too deep. Indeed you are. Now that you know whose story you're telling, and what you've exchanged for talent, our mutual benefactor won't let you go until you finish. If I finish. You must. If the clock strikes 12, and you have not, then you belong to him. Oh yeah. Miranda does. She's at peace. He has a soft spot for the innocent. Then he'll let me go. Are you willing to let your newfound talent go? Advertisements. Touche. I continue. Asterisk, 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 AHOUR 9, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Sophie felt numb from her head to her toes. Miranda couldn't be dead. She just couldn't. True, Sophie had done her a bad turn, but had that been enough too? No, she shivered all over. It can't be. Miranda was tougher than that. Had she been, on balance, The answer was no. Miranda's strength wasn't her strength, but her heart. Now that Miranda's heart was stilled forever. I have no one, Sophie said. No one and nothing. Thus, the curator's penalty proved absolute. Sophie fell into despair. Her grades slipped, and she no longer cared about activities she used to enjoy. All except buying new things. If this desire had obsessed her before, now it consumed her outright. She spent all the money she made working at her after-school job on expensive curios. Crystal, coins, porcelain dolls, china figurines, each lovelier than the last. Her new collection was so stunning that even her parents found themselves standing and staring at it, hypnotized by its beauty. As it grew, it took up more and more space, spreading from Sophie's bedroom to the guest bedroom, then the living room. Her house began to resemble a museum more than a home. She had to tell her parents to be careful not to break any of its exhibits. What she didn't tell her parents was the nature of the dragon force that made her acquire them. The objects spoke to her, not out loud, but inside her mind. An insistence that she purchase them and bring them home. Once she laid eyes on a shiny knick-knack, she simply had to have it. Not for her own sake, but its sake. It needed to be in the sun or under a light so that rainbows could emerge from its glittering facets or smooth glass surface. It needed a place to be displayed, to realize its full potential. She spent hours dusting and polishing each acquisition to a mirror shine. She cared for them as lovingly as if they were flesh and blood friends. Yet, just like human friends, these objects took an emotional and physical toll. Sophie found it increasingly hard to get up in the morning and muster any kind of interest in school. No matter where she was, homeroom, the gym, the cafeteria, she wished she were at home tending to her new collection. Her best collection. Little did she know what it was for until the winter solstice came. December 21st was the shortest and darkest day of the year. Instead of spending time with her family before Christmas, she put on her parka and made her way to the crossroads a third time. A full moon shone once again upon its intersection. Greetings. Sophie was neither surprised nor afraid. She knew whom she'd come to meet. Hello, curator. After a brief pause, he stepped, or rather hovered, toward her. What do you require of me? Another bargain. I have a new collection that I'm willing to trade. She swallowed hard, and she could see puffs of her breath in the air. Bring Miranda back. I cannot. Yes, you can. I know who you are. If you can't restore her to her body, could you please let me speak to her soul? Spirit. My valuables are all I have. They're almost all I love. Take them and let me talk to my best friend one more time. Such trifles mean nothing to me. However, since they mean so much to you, I'll consider them acceptable collateral. You must promise me 3 things as well. Anything. First, you must dedicate your life to serving others. That includes selling your collectibles at discount prices or giving them away as gifts. You will keep collecting and granting others' wishes until you fulfill my other 2 requirements. Second, you must find someone else to tell your story as a cautionary tale. Forewarned is forearmed, as the old saying goes. Third, you must take my watch as a sealing token of our pact. Wear it until the bearer of your tale comes along. Someone as ambitious and proud as you are. Keep it active until you meet that person, then present my most prized possession to them. I aim to leave this world behind and venture to further dimensions. Before I agree, I'd like to know, how much time do I have to accomplish all this? The curator's eyes narrowed to slits. 50 years from the date you first sought me out, Halloween. If you have not finished these tasks by then, I'll take you with me, body, soul, and spirit, to places where no living mortal has a right to be. You won't find solace there until you've learned the lessons that you should have long ago. What if I find a substitute? If I can convince someone else to go with you instead, will you consider our pact fulfilled? After an eternity, he replied, yes, in full. Okay then, how do I talk to Miranda? Do you need any more of my blood? Yes, 3 more drops. Sophie gave them as she had before. Now then, when I step back from these crossroads, you'll see her and can say what you will. You'll only have 1 minute before her shade returns to where I am. Agreed. Sophie swallowed hard. Agreed. The curator stepped back, allowing winter moonlight to shine full upon Sophie. She stared and blinked. The form of her best friend shimmered in the frosty air. Miranda, is that you? Sophie knelt. I'm sorry I threw you over for those other so-called friends of mine. They aren't anymore. I was selfish and took you for granted. I never realized how much you meant to me until Miranda died. The dark thought flashed across Sophie's mind, then vanished. Until now. I wanted to see you one last time so I could tell you how much I love you. I miss you so much. I know I can't have you back for all time, but I'm glad to have you for 1 more minute. Christmas is coming. There's only one thing I want. Not another knick-knack or piece of art. Your forgiveness. Will you please grant it to me? Sophie felt a warm presence wrap itself around her, a barely audible voice. Yes. I love you too. Merry Christmas. And I beg of you, fulfill your terms. I will. Thank you. Flakes of snow began to fall through Miranda and to the ground. She disappeared. So did the curator. Sophie returned home to find that her valuables' voices had fallen still. The first thing she did was wrap up an angel figurine to give her mother. On Christmas morning, Sophie's mom was surprised and pleased. She'd never seen her daughter give away any of her precious things before, whether physical or intangible. Was Sophie turning over a new leaf? Only time would tell. After she graduated high school, Sophie opened up a series of collectible and antique shops in the city. They made her a tidy profit, which she donated to cancer research centers and homeless shelters. She also delivered meals to homebound people and hired those with disabilities to assist her in her stores. Sophie may not have been Citizen of the Year in the 49 years she spent helping others, but she was darn close. Only one part of her bargain remained: the cruel final terms. Who would tell Sophie's story and forewarn others of the dangers of selfishness, greed, and obsession? Who would wear the curator's watch, given as a gift? Most importantly, who would go with the curator to other worlds in Sophie's place? That's where I came in. That's where I still come in. There's 1 hour till midnight. 1 hour to polish this story and send it to Jeanette. Can I finish in time? I'm so weak. Asterisk, 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 A-ed or ELEVN asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Sophie lay wide awake on a late October evening. It wasn't Halloween, but the fateful deadline was close enough. She dared not leave any more to chance. She'd taken enough of a risk giving the curator's watch to a writer with the pseudonym of Tennant. Thanks to that particular timepiece, the best copy editor at Mundy Macabre could have her big break. Pure, unadulterated talent would flow like blood through her veins, and there would be no clots. No longer would she slave away proofreading others' works. Tennant would write an epic tale that would headline the magazine's annual Halloween issue and catapult her straight to the top. All it would cost her, $50 and blood drawn on the hour, every hour, for 12 hours straight. The pact with the curator would thus be sealed. The thing was, Tennant hadn't known about the curator, or Sophie either. She thought the owner of Cinderella's Curios was a kind and gentle older woman with round wire-rimmed glasses. That much was true. She'd never suspected that the gift giver had ulterior motives. However, what if she had? Would she have entered into the bargain anyway? Humbly, Tennant realized the answer was yes. She believed in herself, so much so that she believed she could outwit death. She only had 30 minutes left. In Goethe's Faust, the protagonist repented and ended up being saved. In Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, the main character was damned. The difference was one of lessons learned: pride versus humility, ambition versus acceptance, hope versus despair. Sophie had learned these lessons well over the past 50 years. But what about Tennant? Which option would she choose? The one that would save her life or the one that would save her spirit? One more dilemma awaited her. Miranda had forgiven Sophie for forsaking her in her hour of need. Would Tenet do the same for leading her on and not telling her about the curator? There was a lot to be said for absolution, but also for balance and justice. Two values that the curator himself prized. Why should I forgive you? Tenet asked out loud. Give me one good reason. Within her mind, Sophie answered, asterisk, because we're too much alike, asterisk. Good point. Asterisk, if you pardon me, you pardon yourself as well, and the curator will be defeated, asterisk. Aren't you forgetting who he is? Asterisk, like I said, he has a soft spot for the innocent. Like Miranda. Like you, asterisk. What if he decides to ignore it in my case, because I was willing to give anything for raw talent? Because I aimed too high, like Faust, and like you. Asterisk, if he does, asterisk, said Sophie. Asterisk, you must be prepared to fulfill the terms of your deal, asterisk. To travel with him to other planes of existence, and leave Earth behind. Asterisk, I'm afraid so, asterisk. Then, announced Tenet, I forgive you. I won't be afraid. I'll go where he wants me to go and learn what he wants me to learn. What will you do, Sophie Tafis? Asterisk, I'll continue to operate Cinderella's Curios as a normal shop, with no hidden fees or packs. My business with the curator will be concluded, asterisk. Tenet smiled. It's a deal. Sophie's voice faded from her mind, and the two women could rest at last. What does Halloween hide? The arrival of death, the only known in a world full of unknowns. That and hope that springs eternal. The end. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I'm finished. I'm finally finished. I open Gmail and send this story to Jeanette with 5 minutes to spare. Whether or not she thinks it's fantastic is her business. She could keep me in my current place as the servant of all at Monday Macabre, but I've since discovered there are worse fates. Fates that exist beyond space, time, and horror magazines. The blood drains miraculously from the curator's watch when the hour hand reaches 12. Time for bed. New stories await, but they can wait. It didn't look fun. It looked like quite the opposite. Standing in front of me was a large funhouse. Chipped and faded paint colored its exterior. I had lost my friends in the endless stream of people walking around the Halloween festival. The smell of candy corn and other sweets wafted through the air. It was currently around 11 p.m. Jack-o'-lanterns and cheap decorations were littered all around the festival as people in costumes walked around laughing, talking, and once in a while, screaming. It was Halloween after all. Despite all the festivities and scary atmosphere that was in the air, this fun house seemed largely out of place. Sure, chipped and faded paint look was seen on nearly every haunted house in the vicinity, but this place looked abandoned. This wasn't the only thing about this attraction that stood out. Its placement was off. All the attractions and stands were in the park in the middle of town. The park had 3 entrances. This attraction was outside of the park's west entrance, across the road a little to the right, nestled in an abandoned parking lot. It was odd, putting your business so far away from the rush of possible customers. Maybe it was closed. Then again, it wasn't here yesterday. I turned heel and started to make my way back to the festival. Curiosity killed the cat. This applied especially well, considering that I was currently wearing cat ears and a tail. The rusty creak of a door swinging open and a raspy voice filling the air behind me sent shivers down my spine. The hair on my arms stood as a gust of autumn wind swept down the road. The wind seemed like a warning. Ah, does Miss wish to visit my house of wonders? I turned back against my better judgment, and what greeted me was a man in an extremely well-tailored suit. I was expecting a clown, but somehow this was more unsettling. I looked up at the man. He had a white blindfold around his eyes. His lips were black, curving slowly when he spoke. My name is Per. A car revved by, causing me to miss his name. I was too paralyzed to ask him to clarify. There was music spilling out of the now open door behind him. It was your run-of-the-mill circus music, except the music would pause abruptly, certain notes going too high, then dropping several octaves. The music, it was as if someone was using their fingernails on a gramophone instead of the needle. Scraping. Stop. Scraping harder. Stops again. The rhythm was jumpy, unpredictable, and once again, the word fun seemed ironic. This music wasn't a scary track put on to scare people. It was simply music. In that fun house, the music was part of the house. I didn't want to find out who was playing it. I think I'll pass. I don't have any money. The man's black lips curved upward. He stepped completely out of the doorway. You're our first customer of the night. You may go in for free. Free. The perfect, low price of $0. If the attraction sucked, it's not like I would have lost anything by trying it. It was unsettling, for sure, but on the other hand, the other haunted attractions were boring. I had yet to find one that made me squirm, one that made scream. This might be it. I felt my lips turn up in a grin that matched the man in the suit. Sure. Stepping into the funhouse, I was greeted by a myriad of marionettes lining the walls, dancing as I walked along a corridor. The smell that greeted me was nauseating, like rotting flesh. The marionettes were moving around, dressed as little ballerinas, their movements jerky. The sound of clinking china could be heard faintly, overshadowed by the music. The strings causing them to move were grayish-green, as if covered with mildew. Some of their strings were severed, half of their body dancing and twirling vividly, while the other half remained limp, lifeless. They had no eyes. The empty sockets where their eyes should have been were dripping with the same red liquid as the lighting in the corridor. Red, like blood, probably fake. I gripped my chest, almost tripping over my feet as I sped up my pace. That's when it hit me. Their movements were jerky. They were dancing along to the music. When the music stopped, they all paused. When it started up again, they unpaused, falling back into their dance. I stopped, wide-eyed, petrified. The shivers down my spine caused me to physically tremble. I took a few shaking steps back, and as regret washed over me, I fell on my rear end. This wasn't possible. The laws of physics didn't work that way. When the music paused, the marionettes stopped but didn't carry through with the momentum of their dance, swinging like they were supposed to, before falling still. They stopped. Completely. They were frozen, unbelievably still. One of them, that was swinging through the air, stopped mid-swing. Its head was turned towards me, the fake blood oozing out of its sockets, smelling metallic and dripping to form a puddle on the floor. It was the only sound in that one moment before its head turned, and it started to move. The music was back. I would like to say that my experience in the funhouse ended there, but in a fit of panicked screaming. I got up and ran straight forward. My footsteps echoed loudly as I practically flew out of the corridor, into another room. I hunched over, cold sweat dripping down the nape of my neck. My heart was pounding in my ears, like a hummingbird trying to escape from my chest. My breath came out labored, slowing with the tempo of my heart. I looked around, the music now replaced by deafening silence. A single stage stood in front of me, the spotlight trained on a single full-length mirror. The curtains framing the stage were heavy, wine-red, velvety curtains, far too long for the stage, spilling onto the ground. The mirror was simple enough, its frame dark mahogany in the shape of a rectangle. I could see the top of my head in the mirror, as the elevated stage had a set of stairs, the same wood as the mirror frame. This room was by far better than the marionette corridor, but with such an empty room, one couldn't but expect a jump scare to pop out, perhaps from behind the curtains. Walking up the steps that creaked as I went along, I braced myself for whatever horror this new room would present. Perhaps the music was off here, not just because it was meant for the marionettes, but due to the fact that no music would make it easier to hear me scream. A few seconds passed, then a minute. 1 minute turned to 5. As I stood there, eyes closed, fists raised, bracing myself, I had a realization. There was nothing coming. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. I felt awkward, yet no one was here. I looked into the mirror, the one object in the room. A funhouse usually had multiple funky mirrors in a maze design. This funhouse only had one. I glared at my reflection, not a thing out of place. It had one mirror, a boring one at that. As if hearing my thoughts, the reflection in the mirror started to change. My reflection started to fade, the same happening to the reflection of the room. The mirror was now made of brilliant bright light, making my eyes feel like someone had just poured bleach into them. It was like that for a few seconds, then the light faded, a new reflection appearing on the mirror's surface. Except it wasn't a reflection. It was like the mirror was a TV. I was seeing from a person's perspective, out of their eyes. The person walked across a zebra crossing. They were wearing bright blue Converse, a stark contrast to the cracked and old zebra crossing. I recognized the road. The autumn leaves were scattered along the sidewalks, the sky a dark overcast, and the sun hiding behind its dark veil. It was the zebra crossway that leads to my favorite cafe. I could hear what the person was hearing. The lyrics of a dreary song blared through in their ears. You can't stop it. There was a deafening honk, followed by the screech of rubber on asphalt. It drowned out the music. The smell of burned rubber wafted through their nostrils. The person's head whipped to the direction of the noise. The truck barreled into them. Blood, sharp pain, cracking of bones. Then darkness. I stepped back from the mirror. I had just seen this play out in a matter of seconds. Their death. A flash and then darkness. The smells, the feeling, the sight. I hunched over, retching any candy I had eaten that night. A puddle of rainbow sludge. I looked up at the mirror, about to look away in disgust, when I saw him. The man in the tailored suit. How do you like my mirror? I wanted to respond, but the bile rising in my throat stopped me from doing so. All I could do was look at him and try not to pass out. My mirror is my eyes. It shows those who look in it the truth. He reached behind his head, undoing the blindfold. The white blindfold fell to the ground, revealing what was underneath. There was nothing underneath. The two black sockets oozed blood. Unlike the marionettes, his blood was real. The smell was even worse now. A single black spider crawled out of the abyss that was his eye socket, crawling into his ear. It was getting harder to keep the bile down. His black lips curved up into a smile once again. With one fluid motion, he pushed me into the mirror. Instead of the mirror shattering, I just passed through. I read his black lips as he disappeared along with the room. See you later. What greeted my face was the cold pavement of the road outside the funhouse. The autumn wind swept down the road, and only then did I realize how suffocating the inside of the attraction actually had been. The cold air filled my nostrils as a sigh of relief escaped my trembling lips. I stood up and spotted a familiar group of people standing across the road. They'd waved at me, and I rushed forward. My friends. Thank goodness. They told me how they had been searching for me all this time. They also said how freaked they were when they saw me talking to myself in an empty parking lot. How scared they were when I started screaming and sprinting around. I thought they were joking. That was until I looked back at where the funhouse only to find a single empty parking lot. The funhouse was gone. I walked down the pavement, trying to clear my head. My headphones fit snugly on top of my beanie. The lyrics of a song that popped randomly in my playlist thumped in my ears. I glanced down at the artist's name. Prognosis. I've never heard this song before. Blue morphs to black. The sky was a dark overcast, autumn leaves billowing in the wind. I shivered despite my large coat. The spider came to mind. I could practically feel its little legs on my skin, but I tried to shake the thought away. That was the least disturbing thing that happened last night. The urge to visit my favorite cafe, the Black Cat, had been nagging me all morning, and so I decided to act upon it. Pastries and possibly hot chocolate filled my thoughts. chasing away any aforementioned spiders. Besides, my stomach had been empty since last night. The light turned red and the cars stopped. I made my way across the zebra crossing. I looked down at my shoes. Careful now, careful how. I haven't worn these shoes in a while. Since when have I had blue shoes? They must have been sitting in the back of my closet for a while. You can't stop it. Time seemed to slow. Déjà vu and dread filled my mind. That word. The band. What was the man's name? The honk, deafening my ears. The smell of burning rubber filling my nostrils. And finally, my head whipping towards the commotion as the truck came barreling into me. Blood. Sharp pain. Cracking bones. It was done in a flash. Then darkness. Prognosis. Of course. A voice rang through the darkness, carrying the same tone as the song. What did I say about later? 10 people. 10 people in 10 different places doing 10 different things, but all sharing one single thought. What if it really works? You see, in our little town of Saundhurst, California, there was an age-old tradition tied to a myth so old that its origins were not remembered, nor could they be traced back to their beginnings. It was just something that had become a Halloween tradition for some, a creepy story to share around Halloween campfires for others, and for a very unlucky chosen few, a Halloween nightmare, or so the stories go. What is known is that at 11 o'clock p.m. every Halloween, 10 of the townsfolk show up at the entrance to the town's only cemetery. It's not known for certain what the purpose for this gathering is, but rumor has it that they are all being allowed 1 hour to visit with someone they know who has died and with whom, for reasons of their own, they have a desire to see once more. And from 11 o'clock p.m. until midnight their dearly or perhaps undearly departed appear to them, and communication is possible between the dead and those who have been left behind. Now mind you, these are simply the tall tales that seem to be almost a requirement in almost every small town in America, as it has been since the beginning of time. Nothing is known for certain about this annual ritual by the general townsfolk, because the none should who return sure ain't saying a word. Not a one single danged gosh darned word. Now you heard it right. I did say 10 people showed up at the cemetery entrance, and yes, I did say 9 would leave. As to the soul that is never seen again, well, that's all there is. They are simply never seen again. As for those who do return, I've heard tales that back in the beginning some relatives or friends of the one who was lost might try to stir up a fuss wondering what happened to that soon or daughter or husband wife, or what have ya, but if they stirred up too much trouble one morning folks in the town wake up and find they just disappeared. Course not all of them disappear. Some just wake up one day struck plumb dumb. Yep, wake up acting like all the sense in their heads took a late-night train to Hollywood and left behind a slobber monster with the IQ of a cooked carrot. But now those whose loved ones don't come back to them by the final stroke of midnight keep their questions to themselves and not be trying to raise any ruckus. Folks seem to feel it's safer that way. Now what's that, you asking? Well, of course you can see into the cemetery and you're darn tootin' if the whole population hasn't tried to get a gander at the happening that go on for that magical hour. But all they see is the 10 people form a circle holding hands and being what sounds like one of those sing-song poems you know, like the little unsure always coming around with. And then a thick fog appears out of nowhere and just disappears all those folks then when the big clock down in the town proper behind to count off the 12 strokes of midnight. 10 people simply walk out of that their cemetery just the same as they walk themselves in there. But don't go a-wasting your time trying to get them 9 who return to talk, 'cause it ain't gonna happen. Not one of those who return had ever said a single word about what goes on once that for rolls in. Not a single person, not a single word, not once, ever. And so the mystery forever remained for most of the people of this mostly forgotten town, except for those 10 who would meet at the cemetery gates each Halloween. Jimmy is one of the 10, and tonight is Halloween. And yes, Jimmy shared the same thought as the others chosen to meet at the cemetery gates. Thoughts of, what if it's real and what if it works? Jimmy had been chosen by Ronnie, whom he knew, and while they weren't exactly friends, they did attend the same high school. Ronnie was a senior, while Jimmy only a freshman. When Ronnie first approached Jimmy and told him he had been chosen as one of the 10 and that he would be granted 1 hour with his sister, Carol, who had been found dead 3 years earlier at the age of 9, Jimmy at first laughed it off, thinking himself chosen to be the victim of one of the constant pranks freshmen were always being subjected to at the hands and minds of seniors, and basically laughed it off. But Ronnie was persistent and finally convinced Jimmy he was for real. Ronnie told Jimmy to meet him and the others at the cemetery gates at 10:45 p.m. and don't be late. He further explained that he would have only 1 hour with his loved one, and when the town clock started counting down the 12 strokes of midnight here, better be it of the cemetery, or he would start spending eternity with his loved ones sooner than planned. As the day off Halloween slowly edged towards night, and the time to meet the others at the cemetery grew nearer, Jimmy found himself growing more and more nervous. At last the appointed time arrived, and Jimmy began making his way to the cemetery gates, where he discovered the others had already arrived. Ronnie, dressed in black, as were all the others as they had been instructed, welcomed the ones he had chosen and walked with them to the cemetery gates and into the cemetery, where he asked them to form a circle and to join hands. He once more explained that they must take care to be at the cemetery by the final stroke of midnight, or they would remain forever. He then informed them that one of them would not make it. The others didn't think anything other than Ronnie was trying to scare them, so said nothing, although a couple did make what they hoped were scary monster sounds, which Ronnie ignored. Ronnie explained that they would each in their own turn repeat the change of, "By the light of the noon on All Hallows Eve, give me 1 hour free from my grief. Bring forth." And here they were to enter the name of the person they wanted to see from the other side. Ronnie then said he would now choose the first, and called on a girl named Cindy, a cute little blonde, who, like Jimmy, was also a freshman in high school. Cindy stepped forward and repeated the chant of, "By the light of the moon on All Hallows Eve, give me 1 hour free from my grief. Bring forth my father Tom." To everyone's amazement, a dog rolled in, but through the food they could see a shadow begin to appear, and Cindy squealed with delight and yelled "Daddy" as she cheerfully ran towards her father. Jimmy was the next to be called, and after repeating the chant, his sister appeared, and for an hour they laughed, cried, played, and Joe's, and finally Jimmy said, "I guess I just wanted to say I love you one more time." And as his sister opened her mouth to respond, the town clock began counting of the 12 strokes of midnight, so whatever she planned on saying was forgotten, and she instead yelled, "Go Jimmy, run," as she slowly faded away. Jimmy ran as fast as he could and was, or the cemetery gates before the sixth come had finished, but hadn't gotten fast when he heard what sounded like arguing, and turned to see Cindy frantically trying to push Ronnie aside as he continued to block her from exiting the cemetery gates. As the 9th stroke was sounded out, Jimmy ran back to try and help Cindy move Ronnie out of the way, asking Ronnie, "What the hell are you doing? Let her out." But Ronnie easily pushed Jimmy, who landed rough and hard on his. But just as the final chime sounded, Jimmy turned to watch as Cindy's image slowly faded until it was gone entirely. Jimmy got up and approached Ronnie, demanding to know if Ronnie had lost his mind, and told Ronnie, "You as good as killed her. I seen it." The big clock down in the town proper behind to count off the 12 strokes of midnight. 10 people simply walk out of that their cemetery just the same as they walked themselves in there. But don't go a wasting your time trying to get them 9 who return to talk, 'cause it ain't gonna happen. Not one of those who return had ever said a single word about what goes on once that for rolls in. Not a single person. Not a single word. Not once. Ever. And so the mystery forever remained for most of the people of this mostly forgotten town, except for those 10 who would meet at the cemetery gates each Halloween. Jimmy is one of the 10, and tonight is Halloween. And yes, Jimmy shared the same thought as the others chosen to meet at the cemetery gates. Thoughts of, what if it's real and what if it works? Jimmy had been chosen by Ronnie, whom he knew, And while they weren't exactly friends, they did attend the same high school. Ronnie was a senior, while Jimmy only a freshman. When Ronnie first approached Jimmy and told him he had been chosen as one of the 10 and that he would be granted 1 hour with his sister, Carol, who had been found dead 3 years earlier at the age of 9, Jimmy at first laughed it off, thinking himself chosen to be the victim of one of the constant pranks freshmen were always being subjected to at the hands and minds of seniors, and basically laughed it off. But Ronnie was persistent and finally convinced Jimmy he was for real. Ronnie told Jimmy to meet him and the others at the cemetery gates at 10:45 p.m. and don't be late. He further explained that he would have only 1 hour with his loved one, and when the town clock started counting down the 12 strokes of midnight, here better be it of the cemetery, or he would start spending eternity with his loved ones sooner than planned. As the day off Halloween slowly edged towards night, and the time to meet the others at the cemetery grew nearer, Jimmy found himself growing more and more nervous. At last the appointed time arrived, and Jimmy began making his way to the cemetery gates, where he discovered the others had already arrived. Ronnie, dressed in black, as were all the others as they had been instructed, welcomed the ones he had chosen and walked with them to the cemetery gates and into the cemetery, where he asked them to form a circle and to join hands. He once more explained that they must take care to be at the cemetery by the final stroke of midnight, or they would remain forever. He then informed them that one of them would not make it. The others didn't think anything other than Ronnie was trying to scare them, so said nothing, although a couple did make what they hoped were scary monster sounds, which Ronnie ignored. Ronnie explained that they would each in their own turn repeat the change of, "By the light of the noon on All Hallows Eve, give me 1 hour free from my grief. Bring forth," and here they were to enter the name of the person they wanted to see from the other side. Ronnie then said he would now choose the first, and called on a girl named Cindy, a cute little blonde, who, like Jimmy, was also a freshman in high school. Cindy stepped forward and repeated the chant of, "By the light of the moon on All Hallows Eve, give me 1 hour free from my grief. Bring forth my father Tom." To everyone's amazement, a dog rolled in, but through the food they could see a shadow begin to appear, and Cindy squealed with delight and yelled, "Daddy," as she cheerfully ran towards her father. Jimmy was the next to be called, and after repeating the chant, his sister appeared, and for an hour they laughed, cried, played, and chose, and finally Jimmy said, "I guess I just wanted to say I love you one more time." And as his sister opened her mouth to respond, the town clock began counting of the 12 strokes of midnight, so whatever she planned on saying was forgotten, and she instead yelled, "Go Jimmy, run," as she slowly faded away. Jimmy ran as fast as he could and was, or the cemetery gates before the sixth come had finished, but hadn't gotten fast when he heard what sounded like arguing, and turned to see Cindy frantically trying to push Ronnie aside as he continued to block her from exiting the cemetery gates. As the 9th stroke was sounded out, Jimmy ran back to try and help Cindy move Ronnie out of the way, asking Ronnie, "What the hell are you doing? Let her out." But Ronnie easily pushed Jimmy, who landed rough and hard on his, but just as the final chime sounded, Jimmy turned to watch as Cindy's image slowly faded until it was gone entirely. Jimmy got up and approached Ronnie, demanding to know if Ronnie had lost his mind, and told Ronnie, "You as good as killed her. I seen it. What is wrong with you?" To which Ronnie calmly replied, "A sacrifice must be made this year, as it has been every year, as it will be in years to come. Tell ya what hero next year you get to decide, because y'all want to know how the leader gets picked every year. It's really quite simple, and you won't go to the cops or anyone, or say a single word about this to anyone. Not one single word to anyone ever, and next Halloween you will pick the 10 and choose the sacrifice, or you be the one who fades away, and do you why?" Like I said, it's quite simple, and with that Ronnie gently reached out and touched Jimmy on the shoulder, and with an evil grin said loud enough for only Jimmy to hear, "Tag, you're it. I used to like to go exploring in the woods. Not anymore. My name is Jake Summersville. My mom and dad both have advanced degrees in agricultural sciences, whatever that means. They would survey land, crops, sometimes even the local wildlife. I wasn't sure what exactly it was they did, but I knew it was why we moved around a lot. I didn't mind though, after all. I liked exploring, sometimes pretending I was Indiana Jones, searching for some lost, ancient civilization. Sure, I've had my fair share of close calls, but nothing serious ever happened to me. At least, not until we moved to a small town in Missouri. I don't remember the name of it due to the mental trauma I experienced, or so my psychiatrist says, but I do remember Zach Mays. Zach was 9 years old that summer, the same age as me. He was into a lot of the same things I was, especially exploring. I met him when my parents moved into this farmhouse. It wasn't big or fancy or neat like the usual houses we rented, but it had a sort of rustic charm to it. Zach's parents owned the land the house was on, and the property next door, where they lived. They were friendly enough, even offering to help my parents get settled in. As they were handing the house keys to my parents, Zach came around the corner, held out his hand, and announced who he was. I was never the one to make friends, what with the constant moving around and whatnot, but something about Zach just clicked. We had moved at the start of summer break, so Zach and I had plenty of time to play. We'd mostly go exploring, capturing small animals, and releasing them back into the wild. We had all of 4 acres to ourselves, except for the area near the edge of the property line. That was the start of the woods. Naturally, both of our parents forbade us from going in there, but we did anyways. We'd clear our own trails, pretending we were in a lush jungle. One time, Zach swore he saw a copperhead, but we never did find it. At first, we'd stay relatively close to the edge, but as time went on, we became more relaxed. Before long, we were trekking deep into the woods, able to find our way back with markers we'd given names to. One day, at the edge of the property line, we came across a patch of woods that were different somehow, darker. Thorn bushes were common in the woods, but this place was completely covered in them. In fact, it was so thick, we couldn't hope to gain entry. We walked around it for what seemed like hours, but never did find a way past those thorns. As time passed, we forgot about that place in the woods. After all, there was so much left to explore. Advertisements. To my delight, my parents told me that we were going to be here for a while, something to do with anomalies in the surrounding forest. Zach and I ended up in the same classes, and before we knew it, we were fast approaching Halloween. The forest, which was once green and beautiful, so full of life, had transitioned into a graveyard of fallen leaves and claws reaching despairingly into the sky. It was like they were begging the sky to return the leaves to them. On October 30th, Zach was staying over at my place for the night. It was just the two of us in the middle of nowhere. Our parents had gone too. We grabbed our backpacks, stuffing them with supplies for our adventure. Zach placed a pair of garden shears and a spare flashlight in his, while I grabbed a map of the area, some batteries, and an extra flashlight for mine. We then grabbed our jackets and a pair of flashlights, then headed out the door towards the woods. The moon was blood red and full that night, bathing everything in that eerie hue. It was almost as if the very earth itself were stained with blood. It had been a while since either of us had been in the woods, what with school and all, but we found our landmarks with ease. I didn't know it at the time, but those landmarks would save my life. Before long, we were at the edge of the property line, staring at that part of the forest which we've never been able to enter before. "Look, they're gone," exclaimed Zach. Sure enough, the thorn bushes had vanished. It was almost as if the forest itself wanted us to enter. There was something foreboding about this part of the forest. While the surrounding trees stretched their branches outwards in all directions, the trees in front of us grew closely together, their branches reaching inwards into the darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine, and suddenly I didn't want to go in there anymore. Zach must have felt it too, because he shivered for a moment. We flipped on our lights and peered into the darkness. Upon closer inspection, the thorns were still present. They just were cleared to form a path into the woods. Zach knelt down, a puzzled look on his face. "I don't see any tracks, human or animal, going into the forest," Zach said. "We concluded that someone, or something, must have cleared that path some time ago. Whatever had, it didn't look like it was still around, or had been back in quite a long time. I didn't like it. The way the trees were so unnaturally bent made me feel as if the forest were waiting to swallow us whole. As ghastly as that sounded, that wasn't the most disturbing part. What was disturbing was I felt compelled to go into those woods." Zach and I looked at one another before moving on. We walked in between the thick trees, our flashlights providing the only source of light in the otherwise pitch-black woods. The night was silent, spare for the sound the leaves made as we walked on top of them. I couldn't help thinking they sounded like bones crunching beneath our feet. Occasionally, the trees would part, allowing the moon's red hue to trickle down them like blood. I was relieved when we at last emerged from the forest into a clearing. The trees opened up to a flat field that had to be at least an acre, maybe more. The ground was barren, spare for a few trees here and there. In the middle was what appeared to be a lake. I had grabbed a map earlier and pulled it out of my bag. I had our property drawn on it with the woods circled. There were no bodies of water anywhere near our property on the map. I handed the map to Zach, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. "We couldn't have walked for more than 5 minutes," I said. We grabbed our backpacks, stuffing them with supplies for our adventure. Zach placed a pair of garden shears and a spare flashlight in his, while I grabbed a map of the area, some batteries, and an extra flashlight for mine. We then grabbed our jackets and a pair of flashlights, then headed out the door towards the woods. The moon was blood red and full that night, bathing everything in that eerie hue. It was almost as if the very earth itself were stained with blood. It had been a while since either of us had been in the woods, what with school and all, but we found our landmarks with ease. I didn't know it at the time, but those landmarks would save my life. Before long, we were at the edge of the property line, staring at that part of the forest which we've never been able to enter before. "Look, they're gone," exclaimed Zach. Sure enough, the thorn bushes had vanished. It was almost as if the forest itself wanted us to enter. There was something foreboding about this part of the forest. While the surrounding trees stretched their branches outwards in all directions, the trees in front of us grew closely together, their branches reaching inwards into the darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine, and suddenly, I didn't want to go in there anymore. Zach must have felt it too, because he shivered for a moment. We flipped on our lights and peered into the darkness. Upon closer inspection, the thorns were still present. They just were cleared to form a path into the woods. Zach knelt down, a puzzled look on his face. "I don't see any tracks, human or animal, going into the forest," Zach said. "We concluded that someone, or something, must have cleared that path some time ago. Whatever had, it didn't look like it was still around, or had been back in quite a long time. I didn't like it. The way the trees were so unnaturally bent made me feel as if the forest were waiting to swallow us whole. As ghastly as that sounded, that wasn't the most disturbing part. What was disturbing was I felt compelled to go into those woods." Zach and I looked at one another before moving on. We walked in between the thick trees, our flashlights providing the only source of light in the otherwise pitch-black woods. The night was silent, spare for the sound the leaves made as we walked on top of them. I couldn't help thinking they sounded like bones crunching beneath our feet. Occasionally, the trees would part, allowing the moon's red hue to trickle down them like blood. I was relieved when we at last emerged from the forest into a clearing. The trees opened up to a flat field that had to be at least an acre, maybe more. The ground was barren, spare for a few trees here and there. In the middle was what appeared to be a lake. I had grabbed a map earlier and pulled it out of my bag. I had our property drawn on it with the woods circled. There were no bodies of water anywhere near our property on the map. I handed the map to Zach, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. "We couldn't have walked for more than 5 minutes," I said. Zach looked as confused as I was. We tried to locate ourselves on the map, But aside from the lake, there were no other defining features. At that moment, my gut was telling me to go back, to get the hell out of there. But then Zach started walking towards the lake, so I followed. He reached it before I did and let out a gasp. "Dude, come look at this," he said, in almost a whisper. It's not right." Those words would haunt me for the rest of my life. It almost felt as though my legs had a mind of their own, moving on their own accord. Before long, I was standing next to Zach at the edge of the water. It didn't take me long to see what he meant. Our reflections weren't in the water, but everything else was only different. A few trees grew along the shoreline, but what was reflected back was, well, I don't know what to call it. The trees, instead of being barren, were covered in what looked like flesh. It was then that I noticed we weren't the only things not reflected on the water's surface. The sky, blood moon and all, was also absent. In its place was a seemingly endless black void. "That's so weird," Zach mumbled. Zach's voice freed me from my trance. He walked along the bank until he found what he was looking for, a stick. "I don't think we should be here," I said to Zach, but he just ignored me. It was as if something was making him pick up that stick. As Zach approached the surface, I saw the water move as if there was something just beneath the surface. I tried to call out his name, but no sound came out of my mouth. I just stood there, frozen to the spot, as he knelt down, prodding the surface of the water with the stick. He did this a few times, then stood up and looked at me. "It's just water," he said, taking a step forward. It was then he lost his balance and fell backwards into the water, a look of surprise on his face. I expected him to break the surface once the splash had subsided, but he never did. At first I thought he was fooling around, but seconds turned to minutes, and I realized he wasn't pranking me. I ran towards the spot where he had fallen into the lake, slowing as I approached the edge, not wanting to touch the surface. I shone my light into the murky depths, scanning for any sign of my friend. As I was about to give up, I saw it. Zach's flashlight was on, except it was near the entrance into the forest that was reflected in the water. I looked back at where we had entered, seeing no flashlight, but when I returned my gaze to the lake, there it was. It never crossed my mind to run back and call the police, and even if it had, what would I tell them? That my friend fell into a lake and was transported to some alternate, nightmarish reality. Yeah, right, like they would believe me. I wouldn't have believed me if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. I began to shiver uncontrollably. It wasn't that it was particularly cold that night. It was the thought of what I had to do. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and placed it on the ground a few feet from the bank before taking my bag off. I unzipped it and stuck my hand inside the opening and pulled out the spare flashlight. I turned it on and laid it next to my phone, its beam pouring into the water. I didn't have a signal here, but I could get one near the barn, and I wanted it ready because, well, I had a very unsettling feeling. I slowly approached the water's edge, not knowing what to expect. I inhaled deeply and jumped in, feet first. What I felt next is hard to describe. It was cold, very cold, as if I had jumped into ice water, and I felt as though my insides were being torn inside out. It was like vertigo, but not quite the same. It was as if I had lost all my senses, including direction. When I emerged from the lake, I took a huge breath of stale, dry air. I climbed out of the water and looked around. I was there, in the nightmare forest. Up ahead, I could see Zach's flashlight abandoned on the ground next to his backpack. I was about to call out his name when I saw them. The garden shears he brought lay broken in two on the ground, and each blade was coated in thick blood. I picked them up, not wanting to be out here defenseless. The forest was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The trees were covered in tendrils of flesh, wet and pulsing, as if alive. The world was dimly lit, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I looked up at the sky, but saw only darkness. No moon, no stars, just pitch black darkness. I felt as though if I were to jump, I would be consumed by that darkness, and again the feeling of being so unallowed whole rushed over me. As I walked, the forest floor made a mix of a squishing sound followed by a dull thud, as though there was metal beneath the flesh. I followed the path into the woods, headed back towards my house. Here and there were pieces of Zach's clothing stuck to the trees. It looked as if he was running from something. I made it out of the thicker forest, back into familiar territory, if you could call it that. All of our landmarks were there, albeit somewhat hard to make out due to the flesh. I was almost to the edge when I heard a blood-curdling scream. It was Zach. I ran faster than I thought I ever could, the foul air burning my lungs as I took short breaths. I slowed as I reached the clearing, unable to breathe. Parts of Zach's pants lay in tatters on the ground, with a large amount of blood leading towards the barn. The barn was a stark contrast to the forest. It was comprised not of wood, but of rusted metal, and though the tendrils climbed up the perimeter, they didn't extend more than maybe 3 feet. I approached the doors cautiously, holding a blade in each hand, and pushed them open. What I saw next, I'd never forget. Zach's body was hung on a meat hook, its jagged edge protruding through his right upper chest. His shirt was soaked in blood, which traveled down his legs. His pants were shredded, and where his feet used to be were mangled lumps of meat with bits of bone sticking out at odd angles. It looked like something had chewed them off, and I shuddered at the thought of what did this to him. Beneath him was a steadily growing puddle of blood. I would have thought him dead, had he not looked up at me. Slowly, he reached his left hand into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it out to me. As his arm stretched, he mouthed the words "get out," though all that came out his mouth was a gurgling sound followed by blood. I put the blades down and took it, then watched as my friend took his last breath. I looked at his phone and saw he had taken a picture of what had attacked him. It was human-like, but distorted. Its legs and arms were long and lanky, skin stretched thinly over bone. It had a small tail, like what you would see on a tadpole. Its feet and hands both ended in 4 digits, each complete with long, sharp claws. Its spine protruded from its back and looked as if it would tear right through at any moment. It had a neck twice as long as a normal human, with a round head at the end. It was facing downwards in the picture, so I couldn't see what its face looked like. I looked up and noticed that Zach wasn't the only one hanging in the barn. There were several bodies, each in varying stages of decomposition, hanging from hooks. Some were bones picked clean of flesh, while others looked as though they had been hanging there for months. At that point, I doubled over and threw up, and when I raised my head, I saw it, the creature. Its face was something straight out of a nightmare. Where its face should have been was a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, sunken into the head. It kind of reminded me of the giant maw of the kraken as it devoured one of Odysseus' ships. On either side were 2 small, beady black eyes as dark as the night sky. As it lunged at me, I fell backwards, my thumb hitting the camera button. A bright light flashed from the phone, and the creature stumbled backwards, emitting a horrible screeching noise that sounded like a dozen birds going through a meat grinder. I got to my feet, and I ran, bolting from the barn into the woods, the creature still screeching madly. I heard multiple screeches echo from within the woods as I ran. Just how many of those things were out there, I didn't want to know. My body moved on autopilot, following the markers that Zach and I had followed so many times before. At one point, I saw one running at me on all 4s from my right side. Instinctively, I took its picture, glad to see it stumble and fall. I ran into the thicket of trees that lead to the lake, sprinting as quickly as I could without falling over. As I made it into the clearing, I fell and felt a searing pain shoot down from my left leg into my foot. One of the creatures had dug its claws into me and was dragging me back into the woods. Zach's phone had fallen a few feet from me, and I couldn't reach it. To my right was his bag with a spare flashlight sticking out from the top. I grabbed it. I never prayed so hard in my life, like I did that night in the woods. Please God, let it work. Please God, let it work. I muttered as I pointed it towards the creature and flipped the switch on. Immediately, a beam of light shone from the flashlight directly into the creature's face. It released me, retreating back into the darkness, howling in pain. I half ran, half limped to the water's edge. All the while the screeches of the creatures grew in volume behind me. Reflected in it was my world. Trees without flesh, a sky alight with stars, and a forest devoid of those things. I didn't hesitate. I jumped into the water, not caring about the return of that vertigo feeling. I emerged from the surface and took in a deep breath of air that didn't taste like death. I pulled myself onto the shore and collapsed, panting. I laid there, listening for those creatures to break the surface, but they never did. I turned off the flashlight by my phone, put them in my bag, and began limping into the forest. As I made my way through the dark thicket, I heard the screeching of one of those creatures. I turned around, fumbling with the flashlight, and dropped it, causing the bowl to shatter. I turned and ran, not noticing the pain in my leg, and not stopping until I had reached the barn. With the adrenaline fading, I collapsed beneath the light above the doors. For a second, I could have sworn that I saw one of those things lurking in the woods. I wasted no time. I pulled my phone from out of my pocket and called the police, telling them my friend had been killed. I don't know how long I sat there. It felt like an eternity. I was beyond happy to hear the sirens as they approached. I don't remember much else of that night. I know my parents were there, pale as ghosts, when they saw my leg as I sat in the ambulance. I saw Zach's parents there as well. His mother was on her knees, face buried in her hands, crying. His father just stood there, one arm on his crying wife, his face devoid of any emotion. Haunted house-themed haunted houses. At that point, it all became a blur. I awoke the next morning in the hospital, my parents asleep in the bed next to mine. Apparently, I had lost a lot of blood from my wound and had passed out. I remember feeling uneasy at the thought of having someone else's blood inside of me. The police questioned me, and I told them everything. I told them about the forest, about the lake, the nightmarish worlds, and the creatures. I even told them how to find it. They didn't believe me, of course, and I had left Zach's phone back by the lake. They surmised that Zach and I were attacked by an animal, and after seeing it maul my friend to death, my mind, influenced by the Halloween movies, created that world to cope with the trauma. Nonetheless, the police formed a search party and went into the woods, searching for what remained of Zach's body. They never did find it, nor did they find a patch of woods that lead to the lake. It was as if that part of the forest simply disappeared. I had to take physical therapy as well as talk to a shrink regularly. My leg recovered, but I never stopped having nightmares from that night, even though it's been years since it happened. My parents didn't stay in that town long after that, and I was glad. I hated the looks the other kids at school would give me, or how they would keep asking what really happened out there in the woods. Now, whenever my parents have work, they make sure to rent a house in town, far from any nearby woods. Sometimes, though, late at night, I can hear that creature in the distant woods, screeching in a mix of anger and hunger. Hunger for me. I think, looking back on it all, I had a very gothic upbringing. By age 10, I had attended 2 family funerals and no weddings. I felt that I identified with the color black, and I found graveyards to be an excellent place to relax. They remain one of the few places where I've actually found enough quiet to be able to read peacefully. It's a childhood that most people might think of as weird, and truthfully, it was. Yet I wouldn't change it for the world. I lived with my mother in a humble home on Deacon Road in Kingsvale, England. It was a pleasant and simple life. She dropped me off at school, head to her place of the work, the local hair salon, and then pick me up at the end of the day. Rinse and repeat. I spent almost every moment that I could with my mother. She was my role model, and I wanted to be as confident and as composed as she always seemed to be. I hoped that by adulthood, I would have inherited those traits. And after recently reaching that milestone, All I can say is that my respect for the woman has increased exponentially. Being grown up is anything but relaxing. Anyway, let's get back on track. I imagine that a few eager readers might have come to question where my father was during my youth. Well, here's your answer. Remember those funerals I mentioned? Yup, he was the second one. The first being for my great-grandmother on my mum's side of the family tree. She was not a woman that I knew particularly well, I must say. It was one hell of an adjustment, losing him so young, and it hit my mother and I with some serious force. I was only 6 at the time, and I was a little bit confused, to be honest, about what was going on. My great-nan had passed the year before, and I was getting to grips with that one. Sort of, but the loss of a parent is a whole other matter. I couldn't accept it. If you're wondering what it was that took my father's life, I've got one word for ya. And I'd recommend that you prepare yourself because it's an ugly one. Cancer. To add a second word to the mix, for those that crave specifics, brain. It didn't take long to take him, apparently. I can't quite remember the journey. All I remembered is the ending. Thus, my mother and I were left alone. The company my father had worked for kindly paid off the mortgage on the house, out of respect, and my mum also received some money from various places and people in order to support me. She did a great job of that, overall, in my opinion. As previously stated, I believe that I was raised as a little goth kid. If you're picturing a child that wanted nothing more than to one day wake up in the body of a raven, you're pretty damn close to the mark. However, I wouldn't associate myself with misery. I was quite happy with a great many things. I suppose I was more suited to the aesthetic than the lifestyle. Either way, I was never bothered about the way I was raised. In fact, I thought of it as pretty awesome. One of my favorite things about my youth was all the effort my mother would put into Halloween. She treated it like Christmas, only instead of wearing green, red, and white, you had to wear black. Dark red was also acceptable. She even went out of her way to get gifts for the occasion. I always made her a little card, whereas she went out and purchased genuine presents. Pretty good ones too, usually. One year, she gave me an ebony necklace of a slender snake coiling around a cylindrical T to form an ankh. For the uninitiated, an ankh is the Egyptian symbol for life. You have more than likely seen one before, whether you know its name or not. Another year, she came home with a book full of short ghost stories, all written by different authors. She read a couple of the creepy but not scary ones to me before bed. I still have that book today, although I'm not too sure of where I've put it. When I was 11 years old, my mother gave me a gift unlike any of her others. It was a CD case, and inside of it was a music disc. I looked at the front cover and saw that what I was holding, allegedly, was the 20 scariest songs for kids at Halloween. I jumped with joy and ran upstairs immediately to start listening to track 1. She picked it up for me earlier in the week, heading out during her lunch hour, and waited patiently until Saturday afternoon to reveal the present. I was delirious with excitement, and I darted with it to the upper floor of the house, moving with all the grace of a headless chicken. My mother called up to me from the bottom of the staircase when I had nearly reached her room to say that she needed to quickly pop out in search of a pumpkin. She yelled that she'd been checking throughout the week and everywhere had been sold out. I asked her if I could come with. The evening was approaching, and I didn't like being alone when it got dark outside. A goth kid that's afraid of the dark. Ironic, I know. Luckily, it was rare that my mother left me in the house by myself, and on the few occasions that she did, she always made sure it was bright outside. In response to my plea to go with her, she told me that she wouldn't be long, and I had music to keep myself occupied. If I was scared, she informed me that her number was on a piece of paper by the house phone, and I could call her mobile. Reluctantly, I accepted defeat and sulked into her bedroom, where the CD player was waiting for me. Just before entering the room, I shouted downstairs that I wanted her to be as quick as she possibly could. She promised she would be. When she left, I watched her go through the front window of her room. It was raining gently outside, and the soft pitter-patter of the rain made me feel quite sleepy. The clouds in the sky were a dismal gray, but nothing was out of the ordinary. The weather's never great in England. It's something you get used to with time. As a matter of fact, I felt rather comfortable with the rain. I just hoped my mother would be true to her word and return quickly. She didn't. I took the CD from its case and admired it before placing it into the CD player. It was a rich and oily black, like a thin slate of obsidian with a hole at its very center. Beneath the fluorescent light of the bedroom, I caught a couple of glimpses of a subtle shine to the disc's reflective surface. It was like seeing a single star shimmering faintly in an otherwise empty midnight sky. I inserted the CD and clicked the play button. Then I listened to track 1 as I lay down on my mother's bed. Flat on my back, with my hands on my stomach, I looked like an unwrapped mummy. The song was okay. The issue with it was that I'd heard it before. I'd been expecting every piece of music to be unique. I couldn't recall exactly where I'd heard track 1 before, but I knew that it was not new to me. That isn't to say it was bad in any kind of way. I still enjoyed it. I just hoped to find something original in the playlist, and eventually I did. I found something I don't think anyone had ever heard before. When track 2 started, I gave it my best shot, but I couldn't enjoy it. The lyrics were clearly aimed at children much younger than myself. I wanted something scary, something that would actually give me chills whilst being fun to listen to. I should have been more careful with what I wished for. I listened to a few more songs, skipping through any that didn't instantly make a good impression, and I settled on track 12. That one was good. Funky and a bit creepy. I thought it was ace. I even tapped my foot along to the beat as I lay on my mother's bed. I was getting tired of getting up to skip all of the other songs, and it was nice to recline with something good playing in the background. Before I knew it, exhaustion took hold of me and my eyes started to close. Let us momentarily diverge from this tale in order to paint the picture of my mother's bedroom. It's an important setting after all, as you will have no doubt picked up on by now. So without further ado, imagine the following in your mind. Located at the front of the house, with a large rectangular window overlooking the rest of Deacon Road, her room was a place where everything was designated to a certain and specific location, from which it would likely never be moved. Clutter was scarcely seen in the carpet. A gentle blue in color was immaculately clean. The walls were a relaxing cream color, and the wallpaper bore an intricate pattern that was still visible in some places, but for the most part had been worn away over the years. The bed, queen-sized, was gigantic for a kid like me, and incredibly comfortable. A sweet scent of vanilla hung in the air, and the rest of the world always seemed quiet in my mother's room. Treating the window as the front center of the room, there was a wooden end table that had been designed to look like several large books stacked atop one another, over in the back left corner. It was on that decorative piece of furniture that the CD player resided. From where I lay, I could see some dust over in that area, but there wasn't really much of it. Along the left wall of the room, other than the end table, there was a black wardrobe and a set of drawers, also darkly designed. The wood was flawlessly polished, and it looked brightly beautiful. My mother didn't have too many outfits stored in that space. She merely liked the way everything looked with the room, and I can't say that I disagreed with her. Above the midsection of the bed, suspended from the ceiling, was a light bulb that illuminated the room. It was shielded by a lampshade, which allowed me to lie below it without being blinded. Its switch was on the right-hand wall, very close to the door used for entering and leaving the bedroom. The right wall itself was mostly barren, with the exception of a large clock in the shape of the moon. It had no numbers on its surface. You just had to make an approximation, which isn't too much of a problem, unless you need to be really specific. Either way, I could never understand why my mother wanted it. It could glow in the dark, so I guess it had that in its favor. I still thought it was stupid, though. Well then, that's about all I can think of that's worth stating. Let's carry on with what happened when the music stopped and track 13 started to play. It wasn't a song. There was no beat, No rhythm, no instruments, and no melody of any kind. There was, however, a voice. The bone-chilling vocals of this mysterious narrator poured into the room like a cloud of poison. It was a voice that I have never heard again since that day, nor have I encountered anything capable of closely resembling it. It was as unique and memorable as it was terrifying and baritone. If ever asked to identify that nightmare narrator today, regardless of how much time has passed, I know that I could do it. The sinister sound slithered from the speaker of the CD player and swam down my ear canal, where it managed to bury itself within the darkest part of my brain. It is something I know I shall carry with me to the grave. Until then, no matter how hard I try, it will never leave. Pulled from a state of half-sleep, I jolted upwards and turned to face the source of the noise. There was nothing visually wrong with the equipment, and foolishly, I thought that I might have been overreacting to the intended audio of track 13. So naively, I chose to listen to what was being said, hoping that things would change. To say that the narrator had a deep voice would be a spectacular understatement. Their voice was as deep and as dark as the ocean of time. My vocabulary, at the age of 21, is nowhere near proficient enough to accurately describe what I heard that day in any level of detail. I sincerely doubt that a professional poet or practiced wordsmith could do justice to something so monumentally atrocious. I shudder to think of the sheer power possessed by the vocalist as they spoke to me from the CD player. They ensnared me with their words, rooting me to the spot. I was frozen in absolute terror. At DADOR, I knocked 3 times. Thud, thud, thud. Goosebumps rose all over my flesh at the sudden noise downstairs. A ghostly hand delicately descended down the curve of my spine, and a couple of horror-birthed tears sprouted in my eyes. That sound had come from inside the house. It wasn't meant as a warning of intrusion. They wanted me to know they were already right there with me. Despite the tremendous volume of the narrator's voice, there was something else about them that I found to be petrifying. There was an eerie calm in all that they said that seemed to speak of a cold inevitability. Like the subtext to everything they dared to utter was clearly visible before my eyes. Reading simply, however long you hide, wherever you run to, I will come, and I will catch you. All of my muscles started to tense, and I thought of just one thing. I had to turn the CD player off. Whatever was playing on track 13. It wasn't something I intended to continue subjecting myself to for any longer. Do you iki ea mimi ndi how? The question was rhetorical, of course. I have no doubt of that. They weren't after any kind of vocal response. It was fear that they were after, and boy, was I giving them one hell of a supply. Wordlessly, I screamed at myself to move as I heard their phantom footsteps from 2 places simultaneously. All sound that erupted from the speaker could also be heard downstairs. That was, with the exception of the stranger's voice. That seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, in perfect parallel. It was as inaudible as it was deafening. A paradox that I cannot logically comprehend and doubt I will ever be able to fully explain. That doesn't change one simple fact. I know what I heard. I lovi the peotos nda kilri door. Tyler. I'm coming up to see you now. My heart stopped pumping blood and instead sent ice shooting through my bloodstream. They knew my name. How did they know my name? All of my skin was suddenly frozen, and I found myself struggling to breathe. When very young, I'd suffered from asthma, and I remember feeling at that moment that an attack was coming on. My former condition had returned from its slumber to take my life before the intruder could do the job. The air felt tight and deprived of oxygen. There was nothing I wanted more in the world than to satisfy my urge to scream, but I couldn't physically attempt anything close to such a feat. However, I knew that if I didn't move, without a doubt, it would all be over. I would die. It took a short while to summon the strength and courage that I needed, but once I had everything at hand, I rolled over in the bed towards the CD player. Like a dehydrated man in desperate need of water, I reached out for my goal. The distance was much too great. That was when my vision started to blur. From the corners of my eyes, I could see a black mold starting to form and slowly close in on me. With each passing moment, my situation grew worse. Thud. The first step up the staircase sent a thunderous echo throughout the house, and the walls tremored. It was like being caught up at ground zero of the world's worst earthquake. The shaking never lasted long, but it felt much worse when the second step was taken. I realized that they were getting closer and I wasn't doing anything to stop them. I think a lot of people, when recalling past trauma, just like I am doing as I attempt to construct this tale now, used phrases such as, "I should have acted sooner." Whilst this is definitely true in my case, I do not hate or blame myself for hesitating. I remember all too well what it was like being trapped in that bedroom, with nothing to listen to other than the footfalls of the approaching intruder. By the time they were halfway up the stairs, I was out of bed and leaning over the end table. My vision was nothing but a small circle of clarity, surrounded by lightning forks of black blindness. The weather outside had worsened by quite a bit. A storm was on the way. Before the narrator could declare that they had progressed any further, I pressed the square button on the CD player to stop whatever the hell was going on. I collapsed forward, dazed and unable to maintain my balance. I smiled as I hit the ground. I had heard, clear as day, the all too important click to signal that the CD had stopped playing. And to confirm my theory, the footsteps had ceased. I was safe. I drew in a deep breath of beautiful air, finding no difficulty in doing so, and expelled it with glee as I lay sprawled on the carpet of my mother's bedroom. Then the laughter started. The house rocked unsteadily on its foundation, and I was suddenly, once again, gasping for breath. I held my throat with both hands, praying for the sweet taste of oxygen. A terrible roar of corrupted joy filled my ears. It was intoxicating. The narrator was closer, and they were going to reach me. I knew it. There wasn't a thing that I could do, but I still wanted to try. After a few moments, the triumphant laughter stopped and my breathing seemed to settle. It was unsteady, and I still felt like I needed more oxygen, but I was able to manage. That was when I decided to make a move. Using the bed as a support, I stumbled clumsily back onto my feet and waddled to the foot of the bed, where I could look at the door. I thought about how my mother had left her phone number downstairs, and there was no way of contacting her without encountering whatever was after me. 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, 4. Who's they knocking at your door? 2 step, 3 step, 4 step, 5. Is Tyler Joni still alive? I listened as they strolled from the top of the staircase past the back wall of the bedroom and to the door. My body was quivering, but I tried to maintain a brave face as best I could. My sight had returned to normal after my brief collapse, and I was mentally trying to prepare myself for what was about to come my way. They were so close now. I didn't know whether it was worth diving out of the window and running for the hills. As I contemplated the idea, there was a guttural rumble of thunder from the sky. The storm was underway. I'm outside the door. Let me in. Although the voice had been so naturally intense, the line was delivered barely above a whisper. It was like I was being mocked. They'd arrived at the bedroom without issue, and were asking that I kindly open the door to confirm what was already a fact. They had won. I didn't move. All I did was stare at the door. The handle didn't move. No hand struck the other side. However, I could see something at the bottom through a small gap. Perhaps it was a shadow. Maybe it was something else. As soon as I registered that there was something there, it disappeared. I'm outside the door. Let me in. It was somewhat louder the second time round, but I made no move to obey their command. What haunted me most about their cry was that it was only the volume that seemed to alter. Their tone of speech remained consistently calm, just like a narrator's voice. I'm outside the door. Let me in. They shouted so loud that the house itself seemed to shiver, yet there was no hint of genuine irritation that I could detect. I gripped the bed with both hands, my knuckles clutched so hard that my skin was as white as bone. I was shaking frantically, and had I been younger at the time, I think I would have wet myself. My mind raced with several ideas of what to do, all of which were frankly awful. The only option was to wait, which I did. For a time, nothing seemed to happen. The intruder was silent. I was not foolish enough to think, even for a second, that they'd left. Just past the door, they were waiting. I knew it. I could picture them clearly. A figure of shadow, so tall that they needed to slouch forward to stop their head from colliding with the ceiling. They were there, hunched over and staring at the door with dispassion. The one feature of their person that I knew I could describe with confidence was their eyes. I knew exactly what they would look like. After all, I'd already seen them, in a way. If I opened the door, my gaze would fall upon two spheres, their color the empty black of polished obsidian, with small segments of occasional light glistening from their surface. That was when I had the idea to try ejecting the CD. It's something you would have thought might have come to mind sooner. I'd stopped the disc from playing it, but I hadn't locked it back up in its case. I imagined that if I was thinking straight, I might have had the idea earlier. I also think that there was something trying to stop me from conjuring such a plan. There was some kind of external force or parasite corrupting my brain and preventing me from taking action. I'll never know if I'm right or wrong about that, I suppose. It doesn't matter, anyway, does it? The only thing of any importance is the fact that I managed to gain that precious second of composure to come up with a strategy. When I came up with my plan, all hail my belated stroke of genius. I darted to the CD player and slammed my hand on its top. If you press down on the lid that housed the discs, it would automatically open. I know what you're thinking. That's some pretty advanced technology, right there. Damn right. When the top leaped open, I snatched the black CD and thrust it back into its case, doing the whole action in a single fluid movement. It was done, I hoped. I'd been fooled once. I didn't want to be tricked again. What I decided on doing was waiting for my mother to return and find me. Before that, for curiosity's sake, I would place my ear to the door and listen for any signs of life, making sure not to touch the handle. I approached cautiously and a little bit reluctantly, placing one foot in front of the other with an incredible amount of care. Nothing seemed to make any noise, aside from the storm, which continued to rage on. All was perfectly silent inside the house. On any other day, that fact might have scared me. Not then. I couldn't have been happier about the quiet. After confirming that I could hear nothing from outside the bedroom, I took a few steps back towards the window, continuing to face the door, just in case, and I sighed heavily. I'm outside the door. Let me. It stopped, as did everything else. The universe took a moment's pause, held in suspense. There was nothing remotely calm about the voice that time. It had screamed like an animal being slaughtered. It was full of hunger, anger, and hatred. I stood roughly half a meter away from the door, with a rough idea in mind of what was about to happen. I fought away the urge to start hyperventilating and crawl up into the fetal position. If there was ever a time to be tough, it was at precisely that second. On the mark of what I felt could be my final exhalation, it happened. In. The voice screamed, and the door flew open, its hinges shattering like glass. Whatever happened next, I don't remember it. I'd like to think that I fought, and that I did so bravely. I cannot say if I saw the individual responsible for my torment, and I don't intend to lie and claim that I did. All I know is that when my mother returned, I was fast asleep in her bed, clutching her Halloween gift to my chest. The weather outside was depressing, but it wasn't anything close to extreme. Only the soft pitter-patter of rain graced the window. I told my mom about track 13, and can you guess what she said? If anyone opted for, there was no track 13. Well done to you. She showed me so herself that the playlist was numbered 1 to 12 and 14 to 21. Apparently, track 13 had been cut out due to the superstition that it was a cursed number. So, one might think, was it track 14 that I listened to? Nope. Before the voice even began, I'd heard a much more monotone speaker announce that it was track 13 about to be played. Maybe I heard wrong. It's possible. Although I did go back and play track 14 at a later date, just to check whether or not I was mistaken. It was just a normal, and, admittedly, quite awful, Halloween-themed song. I would have come to doubt everything that happened that day if it wasn't for the trouble I had getting to sleep. I mean, after what I'd experienced, who wouldn't have trouble sleeping, right? Every time I closed my eyes of a night, in that minute fraction of time between them being open and shut, I'd see someone standing at the foot of my bed. They were a tall figure, and they slouched over my body so that their face peered down directly at my own. Their eyes were the color of the midnight sky. They came every night for years, and during that time, I could never dream. My mind was drained and empty. I believe that's what they wanted from me, all of my dreams and nightmares. They were a dream eater, or at least, that was what I called them. It was that grotesque feeding that inspired me to nickname them Leech. An appropriate name, I felt. The more I thought about it, the better it suited them. What do you think a leech would sound like if it could imitate human speech? Whatever you're thinking, that's exactly what I heard when they first whispered to me from the other side of the door. Around a year ago, when I was preparing my stuff for my eventual departure from Deacon Road, I stumbled upon the black CD. It had been locked away in the attic by my mother a few months after the incident, and whilst she had forgotten all about it, I had searched multiple times and never managed to find it. So, what did I do when I found it? Did I burn it, break it, or smash it? No, I did something much worse. I sold it. There wasn't too much to be made from the sale, but the guy I gave it to thought he'd be able to sell it to someone simply based on how it looked, not what was on it. That was all fine by me, so long as I was rid of it. I didn't expect anything to change. I thought that I'd continue to be haunted for the rest of my life. But a few weeks after the initial transaction occurred, Leech disappeared from the foot of my bed. I started to dream again. I don't know who purchased the black CD and found track 13. All I can say to them is that I'm sorry, which doesn't amount to much, does it? Perhaps, over the course of the past year, it has traded hands again. It's not impossible. For all I know, one day in the distant future, someone reading this tale of mine might be the unfortunate soul in possession of that accursed artifact. Check your attic if you're curious. Don't worry about finding it. It will find you, if it needs to, so long as you're close by. And if you do manage to discover it, destroy it. Succeed where I failed, and cleanse this planet from its presence. Whatever lurks within the words of the elusive track 13 is a being of unimaginable patience. If allowed to live, I believe that it will lie dormant in the black CD for all eternity. If need be, just waiting for the right time. Waiting for the day that someone decides to listen. The room had a strange frozen quality to it. What the room held did not readily explain it. There was a desk and 2 chairs, and 3 bookshelves that rose high and disappeared into gloom. A fabulously diverse array of books filled the shelves, but their colors seemed faded, like they were replicas made from a vintage photograph. Perhaps that was it. Or perhaps it was the fact that through the half-hearted bars of light that crisscrossed the grays of the room, particles of dust seemed to hang still, as if suspended in place by an invisible hand. Or perhaps it was the fact that the pile of papers on the desk lay preternaturally still, and not the slightest breeze stirred the air. It was as if the room was a snapshot, paused in time. The illusion was only partially broken when the door creaked open, and a man walked in. He was of the sort you would uncharitably call average. He was not too tall, not too fat, not too handsome. His mannerisms were of a man used to being inconspicuous. An easy and understated gait, not so stiff and upright as to draw admiration, not so slouched and sneaky as to draw suspicion, brought him to the chair in front of the desk. Even his breathing seemed to be tuned to the height of docility, a gentle, barely visible rise and fall. A pair of spectacles lay perched on his nose. His hair was neatly and carefully parted to one side, and set with water. The man seemed confused. He alternated between eagle-eyed restlessness and glassy-eyed languor. He slumped in the chair hopelessly, but only for a brief while. Then he got up and paced between the two bookshelves that lay perpendicular to the desk. Sepia beams of light carved patterns across his clothes as he moved. He sat down again, and then he stood up again. Walking over to one of the bookshelves, he made as if to pick up one of the colorless tomes, but before he did so, his eyes glazed over as if he had forgotten what he had set out to do, and he went back to slump in the chair. Something seemed to strike him while sitting in the chair. His body quieted its restless stirrings. The trembling foot stilled. The tapping fingers froze, and he didn't blink. He seemed to be mumbling something. Wasn't there a cat? But the respite was only temporary, as the fidgeting renewed once more. He stood, he paced, he slumped, he straightened, he scanned the bookshelves, and repeated everything ad nauseum until the man and his clockwork ticks were one with the timeless quality of the room. An unknown period of time passed. The door once more creaked open, and another man walked in. Perhaps it was the contrast with the man already in the room that accentuated it, but this was a man who oozed masculinity. Broad shoulders and barrel chest strained against the seams of his sharp business suit. Angular features were brought into severe relief by the uneven lighting in the room. He was tall. His hair was fashionably clipped yet roguishly long, and he smelled like musk. His eyes, though, were gentle, and his face stretched into a beatific smile when the first man turned around to take in the second. "Welcome," said the second man as he walked towards the other chair, with brisk, powerful strides. The first man didn't react. If the second man's appearance had startled him, his cheerful greeting seemed to have struck him senseless. The second man continued smiling for so long that it began to look strained. The first man continued to look bewildered. "How do you feel today?" the second man murmured gently. I don't seem to remember how I got here." The first man stuttered as if surprised to discover he had a voice. The sentence rose and fell in sync with the man's wavering confusion. "That's perfectly normal. Most of our patients tend to feel disconcerted in the initial stages of the treatment." The second man paused, leaned forward and asked, "You do remember I'm your doctor, right?" A faint glimmer of recognition lit the patient's eyes, but disappeared just as quick. "Doctor, patient," the patient murmured incoherently. The doctor said nothing. His whole demeanor seemed to ooze consideration and patience. Images flashed in the patient's head. No, calling them images suggested a solidity that the apparitions lacked. They were like smoky sensations that flitted in and out, now solidifying into near images, but then fading into fantastic impossibilities. Death, despite their apparent randomness, an undercurrent could be discerned at a level beyond reasoning. Death. They were tinged with death. Death. And illness. He had been critically ill. Had been. Death. Illness. "How did I get here?" the patient repeated. "Never mind that. We're here for the treatment now, and that's all that matters." The doctor's voice modulated itself into tones that demanded trust, while his face was authority itself. The doctor paused for a moment, and as if satisfied with his patient's response, pulled out a sachet from his breast pocket. Something buzzed and moved inside. An insect. The doctor meticulously bored a tiny hole in one corner of the sealed packet, placed it in front of him on the desk, and waited. The buzzing and hovering intensified for a moment, before it stopped altogether. The antenna of an insect poked through tentatively, followed by bulbous compound eyes. The doctor sat like a benevolent statue in the background. The insect pushed and prodded through the too small hole. It buzzed and whined into higher and higher frequencies, until finally it was through. In a flash, the doctor came to life, and almost quicker than the eye could see, he had grabbed the insect and held it between his thumb and forefinger. He jutted his hand out, as if to show his kill to the patient, who watched in horrified fascination, but said nothing. The little insect struggled every which way. but the doctor's grip was secure. He did nothing for what seemed like minutes, but in a startling burst of action, ripped out one of the insect's 4 wings. The whining and buzzing seemed to reach a crescendo. The doctor smiled and looked up at the patient again. Then the second wing was plucked out, with surgical delicacy, and placed gently on the desk alongside the first. Then the third, and then the fourth, and the helpless insect was placed on its back gently on the desk. Its buzzing was stilled, but a faint, rasping sound remained. The doctor wasn't done yet. He picked up an upturned glass and placed it over the stricken bug. Until this point, it was as if the patient was shocked into inaction by the sudden violence, but now he pushed back his chair as if to get up and stop the madman. Suddenly, the doctor's eyes jerked towards him and stopped him dead in his tracks. There was an unspeakable malevolence in them that sent chills down the patient's spine. The patient sat back down and looked away, but he could feel the doctor's eyes boring holes into him, so eventually looked back up. The angelic smile was back in place. Was he mistaken? The neatly arranged insect wings and the slowly suffocating insect still lay there on the desk. Both the doctor and the patient continued watching the thrashing insect. An unknown period of time passed. "The treatment is going well," the doctor murmured. "Don't you feel better? At this rate, you'll be cured in no time at all." The patient just looked at him. His thoughts were an incoherent jumble, and any attempt at organizing them into a semblance of meaning was constantly interrupted by those flashes of dark somethings in his mind. The doctor pulled out a suitcase from under the desk. He opened it slowly, all the while not taking his eyes off the patient. From inside the suitcase, he extracted a bird's cage with a bird in it. It was a blue gold robin, a beautiful, elegant bird that only seemed to shine bright for a moment, before the room sucked its colorful soul away. Its cheeping quietened almost immediately. Despite himself, the patient leaned forward in gruesome anticipation. Never for a moment taking his eyes off the patient, the doctor gently picked up the robin. As if it show how much the bird trusted him, he loosened his grip. The bird tentatively began to flap a wing but stayed where it was. In the blink of an eye, the doctor wrung its neck and tossed it on the desk. His eyes burned with black fire, challenging the patient to do something, to say something, to even move a muscle. The patient sat where he was, pinned by the force of that baleful gaze. He felt tears stream down his cheeks. He made no move to wipe them away. The doctor walked into the room and sat down at the desk. No, he was always there. The patient blinked at him. The doctor smiled at him kindly. "You're almost there. You must feel like $1,000,000 already, but it'll get better once you're fully cured. Are you ready?" The doctor didn't wait for an answer and snapped a largish suitcase that he'd lugged onto the desk open. Carefully picking up something from inside with one hand, he slapped the case shut with the other and tossed it away into an invisible corner with easy strength. He held a tiny gray cat in his hand. The cat mewed gently. The doctor reached out to scratch the cat behind its neck, and it purred. He smiled. The patient stared in helpless discomfort and began to shiver. The doctor noticed this, but only paused to nod, as if telling the other man with a slight glance that it was almost. When he pulled out a ball of twine from a suit pocket, the little cat looked up in delight, wondering if it was playtime. Like a bolt of lightning in a cloudless sky, the movement was sudden and violent, and the twine was around the cat's neck. The doctor squeezed and squeezed. The patient leaped up off the chair. Just when he was about to reach the doctor's side of the desk, the doctor stopped strangling the helpless little cat and sat back in his chair. He straightened his tie and pushed back hair that had tumbled down over his forehead. Rubbing his palm over the sheen of sweat that had covered his face, he gathered it at the tip of his forefinger and flicked it into a handkerchief. Sitting back easily in the throne-like chair, he looked steadily at the patient's outstretched hand and said nothing. To his utter puzzlement, the patient found that he was holding a large carving knife, and it was pointed at the doctor. He dropped it, and it clattered away into the gloom. Shaken, he sat back in his chair. Something about the doctor seemed different. He seemed as handsome and imposing as ever, but there was something broken about him. Were his eyes moist? Despite himself, the patient said, "Are you okay?" The doctor said nothing but looked away and continued to gaze steadily off into the distance. Advertisements. It is well known that cruelty to animals is the first sign of becoming a psychopath, the patient said. The other man didn't react, but the patient seemed to blanch at his own words. "I'm not calling you one. Even if I were calling you one, I wouldn't be using that as an insult to put you down. I never would. I consider it as a form of mental illness that you can do little about. It can be triggered due to traumatic experiences in your childhood." The doctor continued to look away. "Was it your parents? It's all right. I understand if you don't want to talk about it. I don't blame them either if they abused you. They might have had problems of their own. Maybe financial. Maybe they weren't compatible. Maybe they were guilt-ridden because they couldn't give each other and you the life or love you deserved. I say these things to humanize them." The patient's voice grew more and more assured and seemed to ring even off the deadened walls in the room. "It's easy to dehumanize people, but humanizing, that's much harder. And I point out these causes for their actions because these are things that affect everyone, even the saints. And this applies to you as well. I know you think there's something wrong with you, and maybe there is, but that doesn't make you inhuman. I empathize." With those two words, a thunderclap boomed in the patient's mind. Images, solid, after shadows no more, flooded into his brain. Memories. They were memories. Were they? They almost seemed too real. But they were though, and he perceived this with axiomatic conviction. He hadn't been ill after all. Murder. It had been murder. The image of a handsome man, slightly out of focus, except for his mouth that spread in a rictus of animal pleasure. That man had been in his house, and that man had killed him. Smiling. Pain, searing, burning, intense pain in his neck. He had been choked to death. Suddenly his eyes snapped back into focus, and he was back in the room. The doctor was now looking at him. There was something familiar about the half smile on his face. It seemed outwardly friendly, but it gleamed metal. There was no trace of the trembling self-pity that had seemed possess him only a moment ago. You never learn, do you? Tightly coiled anticipation, but with the unmistakable tinge of sadness, suffused his voice. The doctor looked at the knife in the patient's hand. One act. Justice, wouldn't it be? And your forever journey can continue. The doctor locked eyes with the patient. But you won't. In a fraction of a second, the doctor had got up off his chair, spanned the distance between their chairs, and hovered over him like a shadow of evil, cutting off all light. The twine was around his neck, squeezing, squeezing. A burning sensation began at his neck and seemed to sink into his lungs as he began to choke. At the same time, the memory of another burning grew in lockstep with the pain of now. His mind knew what was going to happen, and even though the doctor now stood behind him, he could see his face clearly as if it were in front of him. The fashionably longish hair that tumbled over his forehead. The teeth gritted and bared, as if in the throes of unbearable passion. The sounds of gasping and moaning filled his mind. A red mist began to eat away at his field of vision with implacable voracity, until all he could see was a tiny circle of light, like the infinitely deep but narrow tunnel of a telescope's lens. In that circle of light, a cat lay, looking at him expressionlessly and mooling. In that room of timeless stillness, a room creaked open. A man walked in. He was of the sort you would uncharitably call average. He was not too tall, not too fat, not too handsome. His mannerisms were of a man used to being inconspicuous. When you're sitting in a crowded sports arena, watching your favorite NFL game and cheering for your favorite team, the last thing you can expect is probably noticing a ghost or an odd figure out of the corner of your eye. Yet you should know that there's a great chance of hearing strange noises and witnessing eerie happenings at some famous sports arenas in the U.S. That's because many famous sports arenas in the US are rumored to be haunted. Thus, if you plan to watch sports live from big arenas in the US or play yourself there, be careful because these 5 haunted sports arenas might be hiding a few ghosts of their own. 1. Cleveland Municipal Stadium, Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland Municipal Stadium was a very popular arena in the 1930s, but unfortunately, it was demolished in 1996. Lucky viewers could even watch the most popular NFL and MLB games and make unforgettable memories. Inspired by the legendary players who once performed at this iconic stadium, fans love to test their luck with NFL player props even today and place bets to see if they're fortunate enough. However, Cleveland Municipal Stadium also holds many haunted stories that have left people frozen in awe. Specifically, there have been reports that people saw ghosts of the fans who used to watch games there or the players who took part in the games. The ghost hunters believe that these are people who died in tragic accidents but remain there, attached to the place, waiting excitedly for another game to start. The former staff also claims there were spooky noises around the arena while it was already shut down and empty. With its scary yet exciting past, Cleveland Municipal Stadium is one of the most exciting haunted sports arenas you can visit if you're a horror enthusiast. 2. Wrigley Field, Chicago, Illinois. Wrigley Field is one of the oldest baseball stadiums, opened in 1914. Surprisingly, it is still functional today and continues to attract a lot of attention. The stadium looks vintage with its ivy-covered walls, which, to many viewers, is very nostalgic. Aside from all this, there are rumors that Wrigley Field Sports Arena is haunted. The visitors and the stadium staff have mentioned that various ghosts can be seen here. The most famous is the ghost of the groundskeeper, who's still walking around trying to tend the field like he did while alive. He can be seen mostly at night games. Moreover, you might also encounter ghosts of players from the 20th century dressed in costumes from that time. 3. Yankee Stadium, New York City, New York. Yankee Stadium opened in 1923 and closed in 2008. It is also known as the house that Ruth built, which comes from the great baseball player Babe Ruth. This arena has witnessed some memorable baseball moments. Even though it's closed now, there are still many stories that it's haunted. There are claims that Babe Ruth's ghost haunts this stadium. People say sometimes a shadow of his figure can be seen around the grounds, especially in the area where he hit his famous home runs. The staff who used to work here have also reported that some incredibly weird noises and flickering lights could be heard from locker rooms. 4. Rose Bowl, Pasadena, California. The Rose Bowl Stadium, opened in 1922, is primarily famous for its annual college football games. In addition to the rich history of football games, it has many stories about paranormal activities. Today, people say that ghosts of different people sometimes appear in the stadium, and there are sudden temperature drops and strange noises. They seem to be the ghosts of the players who previously passed away on this field. The viewers have mentioned that whenever they've seen a ghost in the arena, it's always dressed in vintage football gear and tries to give the same fate to the current players on the field, scaring them off. It seems scary, but to some sports lovers, watching a game featuring supernatural events is even more exciting. 5. Fenway Park, Boston, Massachusetts. Fenway Park, known for its green monster left field wall, is the oldest ballpark in Major League Baseball. It opened in 1912 and became the home of the Boston Red Sox, a famous baseball team. However, the stadium is known to be haunted by the ghosts of former players. The most popular theory is that this ghost is Harry Frazee, who is said to have sold Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees. Another popular ghost is a young boy who tragically passed away near the ballpark, and rumors say his spirit is still lingering at Fenway Park. In addition to seeing those ghosts, unusual noises and whispers can be heard around the area. Bottom line, overall, there are many famous sports arenas in the U.S. that are considered to be haunted. All of those places have a dark history filled with paranormal events and supernatural occurrences. For whoever is interested in mystery and dares to face eerie, unexplainable situations with a love for sports, those 5 arenas are surely the places to visit. My first job was at a gas station in the town of Redwood in the Midwest. It's been my hometown now for going on 40 years. It's not a town like most towns you see. We have a city hall / police department / fire department, Forest Joe's the gas station, a bar, a hardware store, and a little school located in a house on Main Street, which is the only street in town. Most of Redwood's citizens lived on farms near the town or in cabins in the forest. There were and are around 200 folks living nearby Redwood, most of which call our tiny town home. At that time, I was 25, young and dumb as my dad used to say. I'm not what you'd call a normal girl. Most things don't scare me, and I'm not a girly girl. I like to dress up on occasion, but I live in my jeans, t-shirts, and biker boots. I'm not tall or thin, and I'm no model. I stand around 4 foot 11 inches tall and am tubby, not fat, but not thin either. I have long coffee-colored hair and hazel eyes. My eyes have always been described as weird, wild, or unusual because they could change color unexpectedly. One minute they'd be blue, the next they were green or brown. It often happened when I was angry or sad. I was often called the human moodstone because of my odd eyes. I had the respect of my town because I wasn't afraid of much. I'd help if someone went missing in the forest, or if an accident occurred, I'd offer comfort and aid to those involved. That's just my nature. In fact, it is the nature of just about everyone in our little town. We're a helpful bunch till you tick us off, then you're on your own. However, like any town, we had our legends and lore, some of which were old Native American tales, Wendigo and the like. Then there's the Wanderers, strange shadow-like beings that have been described many different ways. Spooky narrative audiobooks. People say that it starts with noises, the snapping of twigs, chanting, rocks hitting things like trees, homes, vehicles, ect. Then the whispers that soon seem like dozens of people screaming unintelligible things. The lucky folks escape with only those experiences. Those not so lucky end up joining Wanderers, or so I've been told. Those who escape describe seeing shadow-like beings that appeared to be horrifically stretched humans walking aimlessly. They say if you make eye contact, something happens. You wander into their midst in some form of trance and vanish. I've never seen them myself, but I don't disregard the tales or the number of folks who enter the forest on day hikes or camping trips and never return. We in Redwood never go into the forest without an offering of sorts. Tobacco is the best. We rarely spend long periods in the forest, and no one camps in the forest. If we want to go camping, the local campground is our choice. Many outsiders call us superstitious, but if you spent your entire life in Redwood, you'll have seen things that would make you superstitious overnight. There are many creatures in towns nearby no one has caught or explained, like the beast of Bray Road and Pappy itself. So strange things are nothing new around Redwood. In truth, Redwood is a farming town several miles from the Great River, surrounded by farmland to the north and west. It is bordered by forest to the south and east. As anyone who lives near the forest can attest to, there is no limit to the strange tales told by locals, including but not limited to Sasquatch, dogmen, devil cats, hauntings, red eyes, etc. So it's nothing new to have a hunter, camper, or hiker going on about something lurking in the forest nearby. For the most part, the town seemed to be the safe place. None of the things in the woods ever seemed to come into town. Until one fateful night, that is. I was working my normal shift at the gas station, stocking coolers, filling ice, running the register, basically whatever was needed. Things had started out normal, nothing unusual, so I just did the job like I always do. I should note that Forest Joe's is on the north side of town, right at the edge of the forest. If you go out back to take out the trash, you practically are in the woods which wrap around the little station, with the exception of the highway that runs past the front and into town. Like I said, I had never had any trouble in the time I'd been working there, other than the typical visitors like bears, coons, and such looking for a quick meal. The store itself was a small store, with a tiny closet-like office in the back, tiny bathroom, barely big enough for a toilet and sink, and a small room where the soda canisters for the fountain machine and ice were, all down a 20-foot hallway. Also down that same hallway was the entrance to the coolers. The rest of the store was the big room that held shelves of things you'd find in a gas station, and of course the cash cage. In truth, it looked like a tiny house converted into a gas station. I was allowed all the fountain pop I wanted, and the boss kept plenty of snacks behind the cash cage. So I was set. He only had 2 rules: keep the radios on even when I left, and only go out back to take out the trash. I never broke those rules. In fact, I usually took out the trash before dark. Less creepy that way, and I didn't have to contend with the resident moochers of the forest. No one wants to fight a bear for access to the dumpster. That day was no different, except that I had to wait till dusk to run the trash out on account of a small rush. It seemed everyone was in a hurry to go to the campground. It was a Friday, so I wasn't worried. Many like to escape on a little weekend camping trip during the warm months. I finished with the last customer of the rush and began collecting the trash. 1 behind the counter, 1 under the fountain soda machine, 1 in the bathroom, and 1 in the office. I went out the back door in the office to the dumpster. It was already getting dark by that time. Not quite dark, but still not full daylight either. I quickly flipped the bags into the dumpster and headed back. Not that I was scared, but the back area around the dumpster always gave me the creeps. Especially since there was only 1 light back there on the wall above the back door. As I hurried back, a noise caught my attention, like someone shuffling around and walking on twigs. I hesitated at the back door and glanced over my shoulder. I could see shadows, long stretched out shadows that didn't seem to belong to anyone. I knew I was the only one out there, and one person didn't cast that many shadows. That's when the light flickered over the door and then went out, leaving me in the near darkness. I soon began to hear whispers, like hundreds of folks trying to talk at once. For the first time, I panicked and struggled to open the door. The sound rose until it was unintelligible shouting. I kept my face averted, my body facing the door. I knew what would come next if I looked at them again. Suddenly, the door lurched open, and I nearly fell into the office. I kicked the door closed and locked it up tight, including the deadbolt my boss had added after he had his own experience at the store. I ran to the front and nearly collided with the counter as I saw the clock on the wall behind the register. Somehow, I had been outside for an hour. Now I know it only took a few minutes to run the trash out. I had been doing this same job since I was 16, and it never took longer than a few minutes. This was crazy. Even though I was inside the store, I could still hear the unintelligible shouting outside. Shaking, I ran to the cash cage and flipped the switch for the magnetic lock the boss had installed. Then I locked myself inside the cash cage. I grabbed the phone and curled up on the floor. I dialed the boss's number. It rang once, twice. "Hey, Lexi, what you need?" Joe's calm voice came over the line. My shivering calmed a little. "The wanderers are outside the store. I ran the trash out at dusk, due to a rush, and suddenly I could hear something behind me. When I glanced, I saw more shadows than one person can make. The light above the back door went out, and I began to hear people talking. They're shouting now. I scrambled inside and locked the store down. I gushed. Bam! Something hit the wall. Crack! Something hit the window. I crouched and peeked out the cash cage window. One window was cracked. What the hell was that? Joe demanded. "Things are being thrown at the store." I answered and grabbed the crow bear Joe kept beneath the counter for emergencies. This counted as such, I thought. "Hang on. I'm on my way. Stay put. Don't go outside. I'm bringing the sheriff. We will be there shortly," Joe ordered. "All right." I shuddered. Just then, I saw blue and red flashing lights out the window and stood up for a better look. Joe. Deputy John Morrow is out there. I ran for the cash cage door, unlocked it, and ran around in front of the counter trying to get his attention as he searched the area with his flashlight. I could hear Joe on the phone I had dropped. "Lexi, Lexi. What is going on? Lexi. Shit. I heard him yell, although I was trying to get the deputy's attention. I watched in horror as he dove back into his car, slammed the door, and ducked down as a large rock hit the top of the car, killing the flashing lights. He crawled across the seat, saw me, and waved me back away from the glass door. I watched as he got out of the car on the passenger side, using the door for a shield. Popping up, he fired a couple rounds into the forest across the highway and crouched again as another large rock flew out of the dark and crashed through the driver's side door window, landing in the seat next to the officer. He jumped and started running towards the store. I hurried and flicked the switch to let him in. He ducked inside as I came around the cash cage. "Lock it," he ordered. So I did. We both backed around the cash cage. The deputy glanced at me. "I didn't believe they were real till tonight," he muttered. "That makes two of us," I said, and we both jumped as rock kept hitting the store. By this time, Joe had hung up. There was a loud crash, and we both jumped. I peeked over the counter. "Dear God, the picture window is broken." I gasped, and the deputy pulled me back down. We could make out the words now. "Come join us. Come walk with us." The voices called now in a sing-song chant instead of the yelling. They repeated over and over, trying to lull us into cooperating. Squawk. "Deputy Morrow. Come in. What's your status?" Crackle. The deputy's radio came to life, breaking the spell. "Morrow here. There appears to be multiple individuals outside Forest Joe's throwing large rocks and other projectiles at me, my car, the store, and anything else that moves. They appear to be chanting something. Hard to make out. The store clerk and I are pinned down inside the store," he reported. At that moment, another crash indicating one of the windows in the door had broken. "Shit," he muttered. I could now see shadows on the walls. We huddled behind the counter, the deputy holding his gun and I holding the tire iron. We were trapped in the cash cage. Squawk. "Deputy, stay where you are. Joe and I are heading to your location." Crackle. The sheriff ordered over the radio. "Yes, sir," the deputy answered. It was suddenly quiet. Too quiet. The deputy peeked up over the counter. Then he swore repeatedly and yanked his radio off his belt. "Sheriff, what's your ETA? We have a family walking toward the forest." Then he ran around the counter to the door, waving his arms and hollering, "Hey, over here. Do not go into the woods. Do not, I repeat, do not go into the woods." The family seemed to stop right in the middle of the highway, confused. Then they turned and ran back to their car. They got in and peeled out, taking off down the road. A large rock came flying at us and struck the deputy in the chest, knocking him to the floor. I crawled out and grabbed him. I dragged him back behind the counter where he lay coughing. I couldn't tell how injured he was. The radio was still playing. It was the only sound except the large rocks bombarding the store and the deputy's police car. I had a sudden bit of inspiration and grabbed the radio off the counter. It had a CD player on it. Thank God. I grabbed a CD I bought at the local Native American powwow out of my bag. I stuck it in the CD player and turned it on, then set it on the counter facing out and turned the volume up. The store was filled with Native American chanting, flutes, and drums. I sat on the floor next to the deputy, who was now sitting up, rubbing his chest. As we sat there listening, it seemed the rocks had stopped, that everything had stopped. It was so eerily quiet except for the tape playing. A few minutes later, Joe and the sheriff arrived. They picked their way to us as we now stood looking around. It looked as if a war had taken place at the store. Glass everywhere, broken shelves, the mangled doors, destroyed police cruiser, and rocks the use of a small dog laying everywhere. It was an unreal scene. We gave our statements and the paramedics checked the deputy out. He was bruised up, but okay. The paramedics told the sheriff that the deputy was lucky he wasn't seriously injured with the size of rocks being thrown. I left the tape playing and just turned it down. We never saw our attackers, just their shadows. Whoever they weren't just supernatural. They were very real. I couldn't explain why the Native American music ran them off either if it did. No one could explain that night. It took Joe several months to repair his store. After that, Native American music always played at the store. I never had another run-in with whatever had besieged the store, and I don't ever plan to. If I work a shift at the store, I sleep there and leave in the daylight. I arrive in the daylight too and take out the trash in the morning in the daylight. What happened at the store became another mystery and legend around here, especially with the deputy and I being considered the only victims of the wanderers to survive a full encounter. When I first moved out on my own, my mom handed me a small weathered recipe book. Its cover was cracked and faded, the pages yellowed with age. She held it out to me with both hands, her expression soft and serious. Buy best-selling books online. Take care of this, she said, her voice trembling just a little. It belonged to your abuela. I paused, my fingers brushing over the delicate book. Wait, I said, looking up. You mean abuela? As in Granny's mom. The one from Bolivia. She nodded, her eyes glistening. Yes, my grandmother. She brought this with her when she came to America. It's been in our family for generations. Hearing that made the book feel heavier in my hands, like it was full of something more than paper and ink. It was part of our family's story. Abuela was almost like a myth in our family. Though I'd never met her, Granny loved to tell me stories about her. She was born in Bolivia in 1852 and made the long, dangerous journey to America when she was just 29 years old. She was fearless, Granny would always say, her eyes shining with pride. She traveled all alone, carrying only a suitcase and her recipes. She didn't have much, but she had her dreams and her determination. Abuela eventually settled in Present, where she met my great-grandfather. That's where our family began to grow roots. When I was a kid, Granny's kitchen was my favorite place in the whole world. The air was always warm and smelled like spices and sugar, a mix of scents that felt like love. The recipe book sat open on the counter most days, its pages smudged with flour and oil stains from years of use. All right, little helper, Granny would say with a wink, tying an apron around my waist that always seemed too big. Let's make botines de guerra today. That was your abuela's favorite recipe. What does that mean again? I asked once, scrunching up my nose. Little boots of war, Granny said with a laugh, her hands already reaching for ingredients. It's a sweet pastry, not actual boots. Don't worry. I giggled, bouncing on my toes with excitement. What do I do first, Granny? Granny would smile and open the recipe book, her finger tracing the delicate handwriting. The words were written in Spanish, looping and beautiful. Let's see, she said. We need flour, baking powder, honey. You measure these out, and I'll get the stove ready. Measuring cups and spoons became my tools of choice, and cracking eggs was my specialty. Granny always said I had the perfect touch for it. Well, almost perfect. Oops. I giggled once, staring at the batter where a small shard of eggshell floated. Granny peered over and laughed. It's okay, mi corazon, she said, fishing it out with her fingers. A little crunch never hurt anyone. I loved those afternoons. Flour dusted my hands, my cheeks, even my nose, and Granny didn't seem to mind one bit. She'd hum while she worked, her movements smooth and practiced, like she'd done it 1,000 times before. When the pastries were finally done, golden and sticky with honey, Granny would place them on a plate and sit me at the table. Here, she said, setting one in front of me. Taste it and tell me if we did Abuela proud. I took a bite, the sweetness melting on my tongue, and nodded furiously. We did it, Granny. She laughed, her face lighting up with joy. Of course we did. It's in our blood. Now, holding that same recipe book in my hands as an adult, I felt a pang of longing. Granny was gone now, and so was her warm kitchen. But the recipes were still here, waiting for me to bring them to life again. I felt both nostalgia and hesitation. The book was over a century old, its pages worn and fragile. I didn't want to risk damaging it. I flipped through the pages, the handwriting familiar and comforting. It was like Abuela and Granny were both with me, guiding me, reminding me that some things, like love and family, never truly fade. "All right, little helper," I murmured to myself, smiling as I tied my own apron. "Let's make bottines de guerre today." For the first time in years, the kitchen smelled like home. There was one problem. I didn't understand Spanish at all. "Good thing I have a translator," I muttered, opening my laptop. The first recipe I tackled was, of course, bottines de guerre. Granny always said it was Abuela's own creation. Just reading the ingredients brought back the memory of their heavenly smell wafting through the house. I began typing. The ingredients were straightforward. 9 cups of flour, 3 tablespoons baking powder, 2 tablespoons baking soda, 1/2 cup cane sugar, 1/2 cup honey, 1 tablespoon salt, 2 cups butter, 1 cup hot water. Seems easy enough, I said to myself, smiling. But then, I noticed a line beneath the ingredients, one Granny had never read aloud. "Huh," I murmured, squinting at the page. The handwriting was different, bolder. Granny always said this ingredient was optional, something Abuela used, but she didn't. Curious, I typed the words into the translator. "Messel lentamente one taza de sangre humana hasta quid suave." The translation appeared on the screen. "Slowly mix 1 cup of human blood until smooth." I found it in the back corner of a thrift store, hidden beneath a pile of broken jewelry. It was an old, tarnished mood ring with a thick, silver band that looked too big for any normal finger. The stone in the center had a dull, cloudy hue, but something about it caught my eye. Maybe it was the way the light flickered off it, or how it seemed to change colors ever so slightly with each shift in the room. The clerk barely looked up as I brought it to the counter. She gave me an odd smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes, and said, "It's a special piece. You sure you want it?" I shrugged and handed over a few crumpled bills. It was only a few dollars, and I couldn't explain why. But I felt like I had to have it. She nodded and slid it into a small box before handing it to me. "Be careful with it," she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear. I laughed it off. It was just a mood ring, right? One of those things that were popular in the 80s, an old relic from a time before the internet. No big deal. That night, as I sat in my dimly lit bedroom, I decided to try it on. The ring felt cold against my skin as I slid it onto my finger. Immediately, it began to change color, shifting from a dull gray to a dark blue, then green, then red. I watched, mesmerized, as it cycled through the spectrum of hues, each one a strange mirror of my emotions. I wasn't sure why it felt so different from any other mood ring I'd ever seen. This one felt alive. But as the colors flickered, I noticed something odd. The red didn't just signify anger, as I'd expected. It was like a warning, a deep primal warning, one that made my heart race and my palms sweat. The ring was reacting to something I couldn't see. The next day, I wore the ring again. This time, it shifted to a deep purple. The color swirled like a storm, almost as if the stone itself was trying to tell me something. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the ring was watching me. That night, I had a dream. I was standing in the middle of an empty street, under a pale moon. The world around me was eerily still, as if time had stopped. I looked down at my finger and saw the ring glowing with an unnatural light. Suddenly, the air grew thick and a voice, low, guttural, whispered from the darkness, "You shouldn't have put it on." I woke up with a start, my heart pounding. The ring was still on my finger. It felt warmer now, hot, almost. And the colors were shifting in a pattern I didn't recognize. They moved like a heartbeat, quickening as I stared at them, until they settled on a sickly yellow. I took the ring off that night, setting it on my dresser, but the next morning, it was back on my finger. I tried to take it off again, but it wouldn't budge. The metal had fused with my skin, like it had become part of me. Panic crept in. I yanked at it, but it was as if the ring was pulling me, holding me in place. The color shifted again, this time settling on a deep black. I felt a chill run down my spine. I could hear something, scratching, almost like nails against the floor, echoing through my mind. I looked around my room, but nothing was there. The feeling was overwhelming, like something was watching me from the shadows. And then, I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of my doorway. Its shape was indistinct, blurry, like a shadow that didn't quite belong. But I could feel its gaze, cold and hungry. It took a step forward, and the air around it seemed to distort. I screamed. The ring's color shifted again, from black to red, and the figure lunged. But just before it reached me, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if the ring had grown into me, digging into my very soul. I woke up again, but this time, I wasn't in my room. I was standing in a dark void, the weight of the ring pulling me down, suffocating me. There was no air, no sound, only the pulsating glow of the ring in the endless darkness. The voice returned, whispering in my ear. "You wanted to feel, didn't you? Now, you'll never stop." I don't know how much time passed, but when I opened my eyes, I was back in my room. I was still wearing the ring, and it was still warm, still changing colors, but now, it was different. I could feel it. It was inside me, beneath my skin. The ring was no longer just a thing I wore. It had become a part of me, an extension of something darker, something ancient. I found it in the back corner of a thrift store, hidden beneath a pile of broken jewelry. It was an old, tarnished mood ring with a thick, silver band that looked too big for any normal finger. The stone in the center had a dull, cloudy hue, but something about it caught my eye. Maybe it was the way the light flickered off it, or how it seemed to change colors ever so slightly with each shift in the room. The clerk barely looked up as I brought it to the counter. She gave me an odd smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes, and said, "It's a special piece. You sure you want it?" I shrugged and handed over a few crumpled bills. It was only a few dollars, and I couldn't explain why, but I felt like I had to have it. She nodded and slid it into a small box before handing it to me. "Be careful with it," she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear. I laughed it off. It was just a mood ring, right? One of those things that were popular in the 80s, an old relic from a time before the internet. No big deal. That night, as I sat in my dimly lit bedroom, I decided to try it on. The ring felt cold against my skin as I slid it onto my finger. Immediately, it began to change color, shifting from a dull gray to a dark blue, then green, then red. I watched, mesmerized, as it cycled through the spectrum of hues, each one a strange mirror of my emotions. I wasn't sure why it felt so different from any other mood ring I'd ever seen. This one felt alive. But as the colors flickered, I noticed something odd. The red didn't just signify anger, as I'd expected. It was like a warning, a deep primal warning, one that made my heart race and my palms sweat. The ring was reacting to something I couldn't see. The next day, I wore the ring again. This time, it shifted to a deep purple. The color swirled like a storm, almost as if the stone itself was trying to tell me something. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the ring was watching me. That night, I had a dream. I was standing in the middle of an empty street under a pale moon. The world around me was eerily still, as if time had stopped. I looked down at my finger and saw the ring glowing with an unnatural light. Suddenly, the air grew thick, and a voice, low, guttural, whispered from the darkness, "You shouldn't have put it on." I woke up with a start, my heart pounding. The ring was still on my finger. It felt warmer now, hot, almost. And the colors were shifting in a pattern I didn't recognize. They moved like a heartbeat, quickening as I stared at them, until they settled on a sickly yellow. I took the ring off that night, setting it on my dresser, but the next morning, it was back on my finger. I tried to take it off again, but it wouldn't budge. The metal had fused with my skin, like it had become part of me. Panic crept in. I yanked at it, but it was as if the ring was pulling me, holding me in place. The color shifted again, this time settling on a deep black. I felt a chill run down my spine. I could hear something, scratching, almost like nails against the floor, echoing through my mind. I looked around my room, but nothing was there. The feeling was overwhelming, like something was watching me from the shadows. And then, I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of my doorway. Its shape was indistinct, blurry, like a shadow that didn't quite belong. But I could feel its gaze, cold and hungry. It took a step forward, and the air around it seemed to distort. I screamed. The ring's color shifted again, from black to red, and the figure lunged. But just before it reached me, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if the ring had grown into me, digging into my very soul. I woke up again, but this time, I wasn't in my room. I was standing in a dark void, the weight of the ring pulling me down, suffocating me. There was no air, no sound, only the pulsating glow of the ring in the endless darkness. The voice returned, whispering in my ear, "You wanted to feel, didn't you? Now, you'll never stop." I don't know how much time passed, but when I opened my eyes, I was back in my room. I was still wearing the ring, and it was still warm, still changing colors, but now it was different. I could feel it. It was inside me, beneath my skin. The ring was no longer just a thing I wore. It had become a part of me, an extension of something darker, something ancient.